The President. Members, please stand while the Chief Executive enters the chamber. The Chief Executive. Members, please take your seat. Members, on behalf of all members of this council, I would like to welcome the new Chief Executive. In his first week of assuming office, he is here to attend the question and answer session at this council. I would also like to welcome all principal officials for attending this session. This new governing team is established after improving the electoral systems. It is a sign that Hong Kong has restored order from chaos, and then we're moving towards prosperity with order restored. This is a new chapter for Hong Kong. The Chief Executive is, of course, all prepared to explain his governing philosophy to members and to answer questions from members. President Xi Jinping came to Hong Kong on the 1st of July to deliver an important address. He mentioned the check and balance function of the Chief Executive and the legislature. It is a mutual check and balance. The Legislative Council will therefore continue to support and monitor the governance of the government. We will have good exchanges with the executive so that we could fully achieve the 4 musts and the 4 expectations mentioned by the President Xi, and we'll work together for the well-being of the people of Hong Kong. Now, I call upon the Chief Executive to address the Council. President, members of the Council, members of the public, good morning. First of all, I would like to thank Mr. Andrew Leung, President of the Legislative Council, for arranging for me to attend the Chief Executive's question and answer session on the 6th day of my assuming office as the 6th Chief Executive. The Legislative Council is an important element of the governance structure of the SAR. Executive-legislature relations are of utmost importance. That is why on the day following my election, I met with Mr. Andrew Leung at this council. And then in May, I invited members in groups to have exchanges with me. I'm glad to be at this council again in this chamber to explain my governance philosophy to members and to answer any questions from members. With the implementation of the Hong Kong National Security Law, improvement to the electoral system, we are now fully implementing the principle of patriots administering Hong Kong. The meetings of this council are back on the right track. The damages brought about by resisting the one country with two systems have come to an end. We have ended the destructive phase. We are entering a constructive phase. This is an important milestone. Good interaction between the executive and legislature is an important foundation for us starting a new chapter together. I will be implementing an executive-led governance. So I propose that at this At the antechamber of this council, there will be an exchange session every month. Each time it will be led by a secretary of department, SOD, or deputy secretary of department, DSOD, together with 5 or 6 directors of bureau and other officials for exchanges and communication with members at the antechamber. This will help them to better learn about each other, and then there could be exchanges either on set topics or without any set topics. For example, the Chief Secretary for Administration may lead 5 or 6 directors of bureau under him to come to an exchange session, and then the next session could be led by the Financial Secretary, and then another session led by the Secretary for Justice, and then for future sessions they could be led by the Deputy Secretary for Chief Secretary for Administration, and so on. I will set an example. I will be leading the first antechamber exchange. I will be bringing along the 3 SODs and the 3 DSODs, as well as the director of the Chief Executive's office, to come and meet members at the antechamber for exchanges. Antechamber exchanges could allow each director of bureau to have regular exchanges with members face to face. This will help them to build a close collaboration with members. It will be an opportunity for them to better explain policies and also for them to better learn about public sentiments. As for members of the council who will participate at these sessions, I will leave it to the council. I have made my initial proposals to the President. I'm grateful to Mr. Leung for his positive response. Subject to the agreement of this Council, the Director of the Chief Executive's Office will work out the details with the LegCo Secretariat. On direction of our governance, at the inaugural ceremony of the 6th government, President Xi Jinping delivered an important address. He stressed that one country system has been well tested. It is a good system, and we should adhere to it in the long term. He's also explained in detail the 4 must in implementing one country, 2 systems. This is a valuable experience we've gained over time. First, we must fully and faithfully implement the principle of one country, 2 systems. Second, we must uphold the central government's overall jurisdiction while securing the SAR's high degree of autonomy. Third, we must ensure that Hong Kong is administered by patriots. And fourth, we must maintain Hong Kong's distinctive status and advantages. President Xi Jinping stressed that the central government is giving its full support to Hong Kong in maintaining its unique advantages and in maintaining close connection with the world, so that we could take forward reform. This will give great confidence to Hong Kong and the international community of the long and of the steady implementation of one country, 2 systems. President Xi Jinping has also raised 4 expectations. First, Hong Kong should improve its governance. Second, Hong Kong should continue to create strong impetus for growth. Third, Hong Kong should earnestly address people's concerns and difficulties in daily life. And fourth, the people of Hong Kong should work together to safeguard harmony and stability. I'm grateful to President Xi for his important address. It is of great significance to the governance of the SAR government. I and my governing team have already held follow-up meetings on the important address of the President. In our implementation of policies, this will remain our guiding principles and direction. In fact, the 4 tenets of my election manifesto more or less tally with the 4 expectations of the President. I'm very much encouraged by that. The address of the President is visionary and it carries great significance. I will be fully implementing the 4 expectations and including them in my policies. On governance, I am bringing to the people of Hong Kong an action-style government that focuses on results and resolving issues. My style of leadership is that I expect all SODs and Directors Bureau to be involved at the first instance where problems arise, and they should take lead and work without wasting time with their team. I take team culture very seriously. SODs and CSODs must actively coordinate work with different departments, and so that they could all work together and complement each other's strengths in achieving synergy, so that we could achieve, so 1 + 1 is equal more than 2. Now, I will require all Directors Bureau to set targets for their work. And then if there are issues, they must address them, and there must be a stronger accountability culture, so there will be more effective governance. All Directors Bureau must submit their targets to the Chief Executive's office in August. The government will be pragmatic and proactive in addressing the issues on concerns of the public. Where we need to have high-level leadership and coordination, I believe that some of the efforts need to be led by SODs. So I have directed that 4 working groups be set up to be led by SODs. First, we will set up a working group on helping disadvantaged students to break out of intergenerational poverty. The working group will be led by the Chief Secretary for Administration. In my election manifesto, I have proposed targeted poverty alleviating measures to help disadvantaged secondary students living in subdivided units to break out of poverty. So there will be targeted measures, and they will be led by the government. We will bring together members of the public in this effort, and then we will target the specific needs and come up with solutions. And then we'll also set KPIs for this effort. The second group is a steering group on land and housing supply. It will be led by the Financial Secretary. The group will coordinate the policies and work of all relevant departments and bureau in relation to land development and housing supply. This includes planning, land, environment, transport, infrastructure, social welfare support, and so on, so that we could boost the speed, efficiency, and capacity for such effort. And then we could enhance various procedures so that we will spare no effort in developing land and providing housing supply. The third coordination working group is on district affairs. It will be led by the Chief Secretary for Administration. The group will focus on issues of concern to districts, including hygiene, black spots, street obstruction, black spots, environment, streets, cityscape, and so on. The work of different departments will be coordinated. It will be result-driven. They will be targeted solutions, and then actions have to be taken within 1 to 2 months. And then taking experience from such action, then action plans will be drawn up for implementation in different districts on a permanent basis. Fourth group is the working group on public housing projects. It is an action working group to be led by the Deputy Financial Secretary. It's responsible for the production of public housing. Within the first 100 days of this government, there must be work proposals on speeding up public housing production so that we could have early increase of housing supply. The working group will focus on the private rental housing advance allocation scheme, so that the work of different departments will be coordinated. There will be better use of public participation model, building design and construction, and various procedures will be compressed. The aim is to ensure there is early completion of units. The 4 working groups will be set up soon, and the work details will be announced soon. Another issue of great concern to the public is, of course, our fight against the epidemic. First of all, I don't agree we should lie flat. We shouldn't allow the number of confirmed cases to keep going up, because with an increase in cases, that means there is a bigger base, and so there will be increase in risk of severe and death cases, especially for the high-risk groups. They have to face a risk to their life. This includes the elderly, the chronically ill, the immunocompromised. And also with a higher number of cases that will increase the infection risk of healthcare personnel, and that will lead to reduction in the healthcare staff. And also with increase in number, that means more people will be hospitalized, and it will lead to delay to other healthcare services, such as services for the cancer patients and the chronically ill. That's why we must not lie flat. We must continue to achieve early identification, early isolation, and early treatment to reduce death, serious cases in infection. This is the way we should go by in protecting the health and life of the people. Now, there are various considerations in our anti-epidemic measures. We need to strike a balance between risk and needs. We need to base our policies on science and data so that we could take targeted measures, and we can then pay the smallest price for the biggest effect. This and minimize any impact on normal activities in the community. This includes effective use of the PCR test so that for those who are not infected, they could be screened out and they won't be subject to any restrictions. That way, they could resume normal activities as soon as possible. We will also consider wider application of technology to minimize the inconvenience caused by quarantine. Now, we have learned our quarantine arrangement from overseas. The Health Bureau is now reviewing the relevant data so that we could have a scientific and a targeted approach with the quarantine arrangement. This includes the quarantine period in the hotels and so on. Of course, on reopening the boundary with the mainland, I'm fully aware of the challenges and difficulties involved, especially when the daily number in Hong Kong remains at the high level of around 2,000. We will adopt a pragmatic attitude in our discussion with mainland authorities in exploring these issues. We hope to build mutual trust, and then we could consider each other's position, each other's interest as we control risks and give assurance to each other. The SAR government will explore whether there are halfway options that could minimize risk to a certain degree, minimize inconvenience to a certain degree. We are fully aware of the challenges, but we will keep up our pragmatic communication with the mainland authorities. President, members, this is just the 6th day of this government assuming office, but all bureaus have already started work on various fronts, including education, elderly care, welfare, youth development, attracting talents and investment. We try to enhance Hong Kong's competitiveness on different fronts and enhance our status as 8 positions under the 14th five-year plan. We will actively develop Hong Kong into an international innovation and technology center, and we would leverage on our advantage as an internationalized city, and we will further improve the ecosystem of INT. We will also work closely with Greater Bay Area and take advantage of the mainland market, the talents and the industrial chains. And we will step up cooperation with mainland cities in the GBA and complement each other's strengths. The Hong Kong Palace Museum was opened on the 3rd of July. Members of the public are able to appreciate some 900 pieces of national treasure coming from the premium collection of the Beijing's Palace Museum. And I'm really grateful to the central government and the Palace Museum for their support. We will also make good use of our new and existing cultural resources. And then with the Palace Museum as well as the Empress Museum that showcases modern and contemporary visual culture, along with other a rich variety of cultural arts performances and exhibition, Hong Kong will be developed into a cultural and art exchange center between the East and the West. I have made my demands to the various SODs and directors' bureaus so that they could come up with policies and action plans as soon as possible. We are target-driven. We are result-driven. As for the details of the various policies, they will be announced in the policy address to be delivered in October. I and my team will reach out to the public members of this council and the individuals of different sectors so that we can listen to your views and formulate a policy address that puts the people's first. President, members, Hong Kong has restored order from chaos. We're now at a critical stage of moving towards prosperity. In the next 5 years, we must, catch up with the and then with this rational executive legislature relations, we are able to break away from the destructive relationship where there's lots of focus and infighting in this council, and then with the executive-led principle, as well as the patriots administering Hong Kong principle, we could have check and balance in each other and work with each other. Together, we could develop the economy and improve people's livelihood so the public will have better chances of realizing their dreams. Thank you.
The Chief Executive will answer questions from members. Members who wish to ask questions, please press the Request to Speak button. I've informed members via the Secretariat that to make best use of the available meeting time such that more members would have the opportunity to put questions to the Chief Executive, 3 minutes will be allowed for asking and answering of each question. The time for asking a question by a member should not exceed 1.5 minutes to allow time for the Chief Executive to give his reply. Questions raised by members should be as concise as possible. Members should not make arguments when asking questions. The Honourable Maggie Chen. President, I want to thank the Chief Executive for coming to the Council today. On the 1st of July, President Xi delivered his important address. He asked the government to enhance its effectiveness of governance so that we can enhance the administration so that there can be a government with innovation and to have effective governance. On matters of prevention of elderly and child abuse, I'd like to know how the government can better monitor NGOs so that we can have social welfare services that are really people-oriented. Do you have any timetable for legislating on protecting these disadvantaged groups? Thank you. With regard to care for the elderly and children, the government has an unshakable responsibility, and this subject is close to the heart of many in the community. In terms of legislation, we have to take into account how, when a problem arises, we have sufficient measures to tackle it. On the question of child abuse, I understand that the government is prepared to present a bill to require people from different sectors to fulfill statutory requirements to ensure that children are properly taken care of. Legislation aside, I think monitoring is more important. As I mentioned, very often, we may want to enhance legislation to deal with the problem, but monitoring is just as important. The relevant organization must have a set of monitoring measures approved by the administration. The administration has the role of regular inspections to ensure that the measures are being implemented. In this regard, the Secretary for Labour and Welfare is very concerned about it, and we have had many exchanges in this regard. In monitoring individuals and organizations in fulfilling their duties, we have to do more. And in-depth work should be done. For instance, we should randomly check records of these organizations to ensure that measures have been implemented. I've served the government for more than 40 years. Now, very often, when leaders step in to check, then results will be delivered. So government departments will see what are the major priorities of the government. So in my government, I'm saying that leaders should step in so that matters can be ratified in the first instance. Thank you. Mr. Yang Wing-kit. Thank you, President. I want to thank Mr. Johnny, the CE, for attending this meeting. Presidency said that we should address the aspirations of the community. Now, for the 400,000 residents in Wong Tai Sin, we've been asking for A&E services for a long time so that people do not have to travel to another district for medical consultation. Now, we have had a few terms of government, and the Our Lady Hospital has just got its expansion plan approved. However, it will only provide outpatient clinic services until midnight. Will you extend its outpatient services, and will you move the service reservoir in Shamshui so that we can have a place for expansion of the Wong Tai Sin Hospital to address the need of the residents there? I understand that there has been many discussions in the council for the provision of A&E services at Wong Tai Sin Hospital. I have checked the overall planning, and I fully appreciate that from the residents' point of view, of course, they want convenience. I also understand that it's best if we can have the necessary service as close to us as possible. But when it comes to government planning, we have to look at the overall picture to ensure that healthcare resources and facilities are in the best interest of Hong Kong and achieve the best results. Now, we have got 7 clusters of the hospital authority. Each cluster has to ensure that there is sufficient resources so that all services can be provided to all residents in these 7 clusters. I understand that sometimes there may be different priorities when it comes to the consideration of individual districts and the different clusters. Now we have to see how in all 7 clusters we have sufficient resources so that deployment of resources can be cost-effective and we can provide inconvenience to the community. As far as Wong Tai Sin is concerned, is in the Kowloon Central Cluster, Central Kowloon Cluster. A&E services are being provided by Queen Elizabeth Hospital, United Christian Hospital, and Kwong Wah Hospital. So, now for any individual that requires A&E services, the overall coordination and transport and escort should be properly put in place, and we should also enhance the overall situation so the services can be better provided. The Health Bureau will continue to study this matter in the long run. A&E services for Wong Tai Sin is designed to be provided at the new hospital in the East Kowloon development. It will be bigger and better, and then United Christian Hospital's A&E department will also be expanded. The Health Bureau will see to this matter. Dr. Simon Lee, thank you. Dr. Dominic Lee, thank you, President. I congratulate the CE on his resumption of office. Now, in the government reorganization, it is said that there should be KPIs established so that he can really set up a result-oriented government. Last week, when presidency attended the inaugural ceremony of this government, he asked that this government strive to improve governance. Just a few weeks ago, I moved a motion on reforming the civil service. I suggested that KPIs be set up for performance of civil servants. Outstanding civil servants should be rewarded, and promotion need not follow seniority. But for those lazy and underperforming civil servants, there should be punitive measures. grateful to members for passing the motion. Now, I'd like to ask whether our suggestions will be accepted so that we will do away with this culture of doing less to avoid mistakes.
Chief Executive, thank you, Mr. Lee. Well, we don't have major differences on this issue, but I hope you will take a fair look at the performance of civil servants. I've said this many times. In independent reports, competitiveness report, and including the competitiveness index in 2021, the efficiency of the Hong Kong SL governance remained among the top, is either top 1 or 2 in terms of ranking. And if that's the case, then the contributions by civil servants must, of course, be an essential element. But then Mr. Dominic Lee mentioned at times civil servants are not able to live up to the expectations of the public. Why is that the case? My analysis is that for any person, his or her potential has to be unleashed, but it's not just because of his own hard work. There must be other factors as well. For example, does the system allow them to unleash the potential? And what about interdepartmental coordination? Would it help individuals to fully realize potential and dedicate their effort to their work? Now, and also, are there outdated policies in the system, so civil service is not able to deliver? So that's why my short answer is that we have to look at each and every case. If there are cases where public expectation cannot be met, we have to identify the cause of the problem. If there is need for high-level intervention, then that is something we need to enhance. And that's why I'm grateful to the Council for approving the reorganization of the government structure so that we are able to strengthen our leadership and create the Deputy Secretary of Departments posts. As I said, I just mentioned different working groups I'm going to set up, and they will be led by SODs and DSODs. And as I said, when problems first emerge, there must be high-level leadership and direction. This will make sure that civil servants are able to work more efficiently with clear delineation of duties. But of course, if there are individual civil servants who've committed grave mistakes, there is a system in place to deal with that. But then when I proposed setting KPIs, the first and foremost purpose is to make sure that the progress is in line with our expectation. And then if we see delays, then we could intervene at once. That is the whole purpose of the KPI system. Its aim is to improve our efficiency. Mr. Lee. Chief Executive, thank you for coming to this council on the 6th day of office. And I also welcome your proposal to have regular anti-chamber exchanges. Under your leadership, I hope the SAL government will build a new style of executive-legislature relations, and that together we could achieve good governance and start a new chapter for Hong Kong. Now here, today I want to ask about the roadmap for reopening the boundary of the mainland, because it's very important for Hong Kong. It affects our competitors, and many families could separated. And of course, economic development is at stake as well. So we understand, of course, the government needs to strike a careful balance with, but then the epidemic has been around for some 2 years. We hope the new government could lead us to resume quarantine travel with the mainland and with the outside world. Now, for mainland travel, we hope there will be shortening of the quarantine period, and then there could also be more quota places for traveling to the mainland, so that we could address the scoping activities involving quarantine hotels and so on. As for opening up to the outside world, I hope you will also have plans. I hope you could share with us your plans on how you can lead Hong Kong to resume quarantine-free travel with the mainland and with the international community. Chief Executive. Well, what you asked, Ms. Starley, is of course an issue of great concern to members of the public. When I ran for election, I stressed the importance of resuming quarantine travel with the mainland and with overseas countries. But then we must also appreciate fully that we have to bear in mind the health risks. And we must not add to the health risks of the mainland if we resume normal travel. First, let me talk about resuming quarantine travel with overseas countries and places. In fact, I kept saying this to the media. This is something very much on my mind all the time. We want to facilitate travel from other places to Hong Kong and the other way around. At the same time, we need to have effective infection control in place. Now, before Professor Low assumed office, he had discussions with me. We would like to have a targeted approach to minimize the inconvenience of people coming to Hong Kong or returning to Hong Kong. I agree with his view. That is, we must have an effective way to screen out those who have not been infected so that they could resume to normal activities as soon as possible. In other words, we should only, barricade the tree that's diseased, but not other trees that are healthy. And I fully subscribe to that principle. I understand Professor Low is actively analyzing data to take forward this approach. And I see eye to eye with him on that, as I said. And in particular, we want to see what we can do about the quarantine period. At the same time, I say that we must do it in an orderly and gradual manner. Because if we take any measure that and then we will have to relax our stringent control, then maybe it's not the best way forward. But anyway, let me say a bit more on the resumption of quarantine-free travel with the mainland, because this is of great concern to the public, understand. Now, as I have discussions with mainland authorities on resumption of quarantine-free travel, that was at the end of the fourth wave of outbreak. And at the time, it was agreed that it's a matter of mutual trust and whether we're able to see each other's position, and as we consider possible measures. That's why I say that we have to be able to control risk and infection. And then when we go to the mainland, then there may be more convenient quarantine measures. Professor Low has had discussion with the mainland authorities about the 7+3 option. There is a high demand for hotel rooms for quarantine purpose. And so that's why the mainland authorities have increased the number of quarantine hotels from 1,300 to 2,000. We're grateful for that. So this shows that it's important that we have communication, that we're able to convey our difficulties or explain our difficulties to the mainland authorities and so on. Of course, I won't rule out any possibilities, but as we discuss practical solutions, I don't want to give the wrong impression to the public that we have already set our eye on one particular option. What I'm trying to say is that the principle is to minimize inconvenience. And then we try to see if there is any halfway option. So that's a pragmatic approach, and I hope the public could see that is the policy direction we have. Thank you. Ms. Connie Lam. Thank you, President. Good morning, Chief Executive. Thank you for coming to this question and answer session. Now, in past media interviews, you admitted that the current quarantine measures are inconvenient to travelers and the people of Hong Kong, and you will formulate strategy to reopen the boundary. For example, for home quarantine or shortening of quarantine period and so on. In fact, our competitor Singapore has removed all quarantine measures for inbound travelers. This is to facilitate business activities. Different sectors in Hong Kong would also like the SL government to relax quarantine measures in an appropriate manner, having regard to the need to control infection. So would you consider, for example, designating different risk level for different zones and places? So for low risk zones, the quarantine period will be, say, 3 days in hotels and 4 days of home care, and then for say a high risk or low risk 7 days of home quarantine for those who've had 3 doses of vaccine and so on. So there could be different treatment for people coming from different risk zones. Well, I hope members will appreciate that the situation in Hong Kong is rather unique. We have a relatively higher proportion of elderly persons in the population. And we're grateful, of course, to the elderly for their contribution to the community. Now, because we have a high ratio of elderly, so there are higher risks. And also, our housing condition is more crowded compared to other places. So, in terms of transmission risk, and the risks brought about by an increase in the number of confirmed cases, our situation is unique because of the 2 factors I mentioned. But at the same time, I appreciate it's important for us to, keep up our connection with overseas countries, and we need to allow more travelers to come to Hong Kong. I also attach great importance to boosting our competitiveness and facilitating investors to come to Hong Kong. So that's why the Health Bureau is now actively looking at the issue. Say, with the hotel quarantine, we need to base our policy on precise data. We'll see how we could shorten the quarantine period while managing the risk. For prevention of imported cases, every day we still have over 100 imported cases. That's why we must proceed with caution. I don't want her to have to backtrack after announcing a policy, but of course I am anxious too that we do something. So Ms. Lam, I will ask the Health Bureau to work as soon as possible to complete their review and analysis, and then they could explain some ideas we have in mind to you. Thank you. Mr. Chen Xiu-Hong. Thank you, President. Chief Executive, let me congratulate you again for being elected the 6th Chief Executive of the Hong Kong SAR. I and members of the public have high expectations of you and your governing team. This year is the 25th anniversary of Hong Kong's return to the motherland. In the past 25 years, Hong Kong has made huge achievements with the support of the central government. It shows to the world that the one country, 2 systems work and is welcomed by the people. But then foreign forces keep, attacking China on Hong Kong issues. They try to undermine China's image and suppress their development. So there will probably be more of this because of the competition between these major countries. Now, what measures do you have to deal with false information, and how can you tell a good Hong Kong story and a good China story? Chief Executive, Mr. Chen is spot on. In the first internal meeting since I assumed office, I mentioned the need for us to do good, proper publicity and to tell a positive story about Hong Kong. Now, in the past, government officials of Hong Kong probably have just been working in a pragmatic manner. You know, we may be gentlemen, but then there are many others who are not around the world. So how do we explain ourselves properly? First of all, we have to tell people about our advantage, our achievements, and our success. There have to be a good theory basis for explaining these issues. So that's why we have to explain our work properly. We have 15 policy bureaux, and all these bureaux have made good achievements in their respective areas. So we need to tell people about what we've done well. We can't just, be too humble. So we need to keep repeating our achievements. That's something we need to do better. And we ask members of this council to help us in that respect. Secondly, we have to make good use of different platforms. Say, in our communication with the media, the public, and the world. These are channels for us to give out information about Hong Kong. In the past, again, we've adopted a rather pragmatic and even conservative approach. So we'll be doing more in this area. Apart from the conventional media, there are new social media platforms and other new ways of communication. We have to explore all these possibilities. And thirdly, apart from being pragmatic, we have to be bold. That means we have to tell people what our strengths and our advantages. And we have to do that in person. That's why I've said that we will be dispatching officials to overseas visits, and we'll invite others from different sectors to come with us and tell people about our achievements. That will include the Trade Development Council. And then recently, we have set up different exchanges. So we will be sending delegations overseas to tell the Hong Kong story. And we can tell people about what is actually going on in Hong Kong. Thank you.
Mr. Tony C. Thank you, President. There are many sectors in Hong Kong facing a shortage of manpower and brain drain. The pandemic and the brain drain or immigration might be one of the causes, but then it's also because of aging population and low fertility rate. And fewer young people are moving to Hong Kong from the mainland. So when we lack manpower and talent, how can we do as required by President Xi, that is to keep strengthening our momentum of development, and how can we continue to enhance our competitiveness? Chief Executive, you earlier on talked about the wastage of manpower and talent, and you said that these people are bound to come back to Hong Kong. I have the feeling that you're not being proactive enough. So when it comes to population policy and our manpower policy, what concrete plans does the new government have? And what targets do you have? Thank you. I've just been in office for 6 days, and I've asked bureau directors to start working in different areas. When it comes to manpower, of course, manpower is indispensable in raising our competitiveness. Well, we can do this on a few fronts. First, is Hong Kong attractive? I think so. As mentioned, because of our quarantine requirements, well, there is some deterrence for talents to come to Hong Kong, so I have been working on this very proactively. My policy objectives do consider attracting talents to Hong Kong. Hong Kong is an attractive place. We must not be too humble. Now, in the past, we have done very well in attracting talents to Hong Kong. Our competitiveness ranked number 5 in some very important world reports. Of course, we have a free economy of the rule of law. We are an inclusive and open society. We are a vibrant society, a low tax regime, and our systems are well established, a high degree of transparency with the rule of law to protect people's rights. So no one can smear us in these areas. Still, we have to continue to do better. We have to provide more opportunities to attract talents. We should expand our market. Our market should not be confined to Hong Kong. Of course, many people like to invest and develop in Hong Kong. And the more important market is the Greater Bay Area. Our liaison with the Greater Bay Area and integration into the overall development of the country is very attractive. Now, for innovation and technology, now if we can attract leading enterprises to Hong Kong in this sector, that will enhance the overall competitiveness of Hong Kong. Furthermore, I have discussed with the Commerce and Economic Development Bureau. We're exploring together how we can attract enterprises to Hong Kong with policies so that they can bring development opportunities to Hong Kong, and we should provide facilitating measures for them to come. The Bureau is actively exploring this, and I hope that within a couple of months, the Bureau can come up with new suggestions for me so that I can include them in my policy address. The purpose is to compete for talents with other parts of the world. Dr. Priscilla Leung. President, I welcome the Chief Executive to our question and answer session. This is really a new chapter for good governance. On the 1st of July, President Xi gave Hong Kong a big gift, and that is one country, two systems is a good system, and it should be adhered to in the long run. That means, I believe, 2047 is no longer cut-off point, and I think this point should be pressed upon to Hong Kong and to the world. I think this should be a very happy news for the people of Hong Kong. Meanwhile, the president also showed that he is fully aware of the problems of Hong Kong. He said that we should ensure integration of the overall jurisdiction of the central authorities, a high degree of autonomy, and he mentioned 4 expectations, one of which is to set up key performance indicators for our performance. I think the most important part is our mentality. Many young people and also different sectors of the community may not know how to grasp this great opportunities brought about by the current situation. One country, two systems is a good system, and President Xi has once again reaffirmed his commitment to the system. One country, two systems is an example for the whole world, is a great achievement. How can we tell the story of China well and the story of one country, two systems well? In particular, after the black violence, many people have no regard for the rule of law, and they treat our motherland as enemy. So how can we ensure that different sectors of the community understand this? Please allow the Chief Executive to answer your question. Dr. Leung, I can agree more with what you said about the President Xi's important speech. Now, one country, two system has been fully implemented and reviewed. It is in line with the fundamental interests of the country of Hong Kong and Macau, and it has the full support of the 1.4 billion people in Hong Kong. It's fully supported by everyone in Hong Kong, and also recognized by the international community in general. This is a good system. There is no reason why we should do away with it, and we must adhere to the system in the long term. I'd like to remind everyone this important speech made by President Xi, as said by Dr. Leung. How can we build up this ambience in Hong Kong so that one country, two systems can sail far and long and steady, and how our ideology is in the best interest of the development of Hong Kong, as pointed out by President Xi. We hope that all compatriots in Hong Kong can has built up these core values that love the country and love Hong Kong, and we should continue to be inclusive. We should seek common grounds in preserving differences, and we should preserve the fine traditions of the country so that we can build a better future for everyone. So my focus is on core or mainstream values, and this echo what Dr. Leung said just now. We have to ensure that the whole community can have stability, and as regards how we build up mainstream values, first we have to strengthen traditional values, and for soft education, we can make use, we can deal with our media and our journalists, and in arts and culture, we should build up mainstream values in these areas. And as for patriotism and love for Hong Kong, now we must promote such mentality so that we have a stronger sense of national identity and affection for the country. So apart from soft education I just mentioned, now culture as well as the general ambience in society are important. And we should also let the world know Hong Kong's achievements. Why should we tell the world our success story? That we can have international recognition and identity, and people will feel proud of being Hong Kong, for being part of Hong Kong. Thank you. Mr. Kok Wai Keung. Thank you, President. Presidency has mentioned 4 expectations for the new term of government. And he said that we must remove the vested interest in Hong Kong, and then we have to ensure that everyone in Hong Kong can share the fruit of prosperity. Now, and whenever we talked about improving labor rights, the government and the business sector will stand on the same side, saying that that will add to the operating costs of enterprises. They rarely consider protection for workers, and therefore we cannot see major improvements for labor rights, not to mention sharing in the fruits of prosperity and development. I'd like to ask the President, how do you deal with the 2 points of the 4 expectations raised by Presidency? Now, FTU suggests that we first start with an annual review of the statutory minimum wage as a start, because currently we have biannual reviews. As a result, wages have lagged far behind economic development, and we have a working poor in Hong Kong. We must also review the statutory minimum wage mechanism, because in 2021 there was inflation, but then there was no increase in SMW. We have to ensure that employees share the fruits of prosperity. So will the Chief Executive accept FTU's suggestion? Chief Executive. Thank you, Mr. Kwok, for your suggestion. Now, in terms of economic development and benefits for the employees, we must unite the whole community to work hard together to contribute to our economy. Of course, we must develop our economy, and we have to ensure that the benefits of economic development can be enjoyed by our workers. Thanks to the hard work of all workers in Hong Kong, we see prosperity now. I started from the most junior rank myself, and I am grateful to the hard work made by our workers, and they should be fully recognized for their contribution. However, we do not just have the business sector and the employees. The community, the academia, the government, and the business sector should work together, because the whole industry must develop so that our employees can be duly rewarded and they can realize what they want to do. Now, if they can engage in higher paid jobs, and if their jobs are in line with their interest, that's the best. And so in dealing with labor rights and protection, we should have an overall perspective. We should not just isolate a certain sector. We should not just confine our thinking. We should look at the whole cycle in society. Workers should have skills, and they should be able to strive for their dreams. And if their remuneration can be increased because of development in their respective sector, they can work in a good environment. We rely on the government as well as the business sector and the academia and the labor sector to work together. As regards SMW, I understand that come October, a report will be presented to me. I'll first read the report and see what recommendations it contains. And when it comes to review of the mechanism, the Secretary for Labor and Welfare can look into it fully. Thank you.
Ms. Elizabeth Court, first of all, I would like to welcome the Chief Executive to this council. Just now, the Chief Executive said he's going to set up 4 working groups. And apart from housing and land supply, there will be a working group on poverty alleviation and another on improving the environment of the local districts. I'm glad to hear about that. I hope you will be able to come up with some pragmatic solutions soon. Now, President Xi Jinping delivered his important address on the 1st of July. He said it's important to uphold sovereignty and protect national interests. This is the highest guiding principle. Now, I always say the cybersecurity is will have great impact on national security. So it's important to legislate for to prohibit false information and so on. And also, the latest power blackout of the China Light and Power shows that it's important that we ensure the security of infrastructure. Now, foreign forces are still eyeing Hong Kong. So in terms of the overall security consideration, do you have plans to review different aspects of security and see if there's need to act in any way and in enhancing security? And how do you make sure that the government has a strong sense of awareness with countering risk and also protecting national security? Thank you. Chief Executive. Now, it is our constitutional duty to protect national security. It is also our duty to do so as a Chinese. So the government has the duty to do that. Now, you mentioned a series of possible security threats. Now, of course, we need to be reminded of the different security risks and threats, and then we could keep enhancing our security systems. For example, anti-epidemic effort is also about health and safety, personal safety. And then in my election manifesto, I mentioned that for the 6th government, we need to build a solid foundation for future development. And by solid foundation, I mean we need to address the different security risks and threats. Of national security is one thing, food security, system security, and financial security, and so on. They are all very important. So with ensuring security, there are 2 considerations. First is about legislation. So that's why we have the Hong Kong National Security Law, and also we have the duty to legislate for Article 23. But as I've said before, we need to come up with some legislation that will cover all possible security threats. And of course, we will move as quickly as possible. But at the same time, I have asked that government departments concerned to look at possible risks and the factors of countering this risk. And also we need to enhance security say for the fourth and the fifth wave of the epidemic outbreak, to some extent, we have been so much affected by Omicron because it's transmitting so quickly. It's a much higher level of transmissibility. So we need to be prepared for unforeseen circumstances. So we need to enhance our security level. That means we need to increase manpower and resources. We also need to enhance certainty. By certainty, that means when we need to use certain resources, we know they will be ready within a specific time frame. And the second certainty is that when we have limited resources, where we could get help. Now we have an advantage here because we have one country, two systems. The Greater Bay Area cities are like brothers to us. So when we need help, how they will help, this is one area about certainty. But then, of course, with the security measures, some are made public, some aren't. For the security measures made public, they are to give people assurance, but then for the measures not public, this is to make sure that enemies won't be able to attack us by learning about our security the measures. So we need to review all these security threats in Hong Kong, but then different departments need to improve their own security measures and their contingency plans too. Now, I said that we have an emergency response mechanism. This is to make sure that we could enhance our certainty and security. For example, when I judge that we are in a crisis and then we need a certain number of staff members to handle that, then I'll be able to deploy, say, 3% of the 180,000 civil service force. So that means about 5,000 plus people. Or even if the threat is more serious, then we could raise that to 10%. So that means we will have over 10,000 people to respond to the situation. So it's also about the speed of deployment. And also we need to have these people trained properly. And then when we assign tasks and people know exactly what they need to do at the first instance, and then everybody will be in position. And this is something I have to work very hard on. Mr. Benson, look, now President Xi Jinping mentioned 4 must and 4 expectation in his July 1st important address. He said, he also reminded us that we have to care for young people and we need to help them address their challenges. Now, I have criticisms about young people. Young people may see things very differently than adults. For example, we keep saying that young people want to buy a home so they could get married and have children. That means they want to start a family. But then for young people, many tell us that they want to buy a home because they want to have their roots firmly based in Hong Kong. Now, I have for many years been actively promoting direct communication between the government and young people. Chief Executive, I know you care very much about young people. If there is a young person now standing before you and he wants to tell you about their visions and their views about Hong Kong, so what do you expect the young person to tell you so that we could together resolve on the issues affecting Hong Kong? Chief Executive, well, this is I care very much about the Committee of Hong Kong. Care very much about young people in Hong Kong. Every young person may have different aspirations, so I would very much want them to tell me, Chief Executive. Well, in the next 5 years, maybe the government still not able to meet all my demands, but at least what I want to do, I'm able to do, and I'm able to realize my dreams, and I'm moving in the right direction. Now that is the least that I set for myself as a target. But of course, I want us to do even more than that. I want young people to tell me that in this 5 years, I'm able to start my own business. I say I've started my own barber shop, or I'm taking good care of my parents. Each young person may have different aspirations. As I grew up, I also had different goals. But of course, this goals would change over time. That's why I stress the importance that we have a comprehensive youth development policy and blueprint. We need to cater to the different needs of young people and help them at the macro level. In terms of employment, education, career, and so on. Now, in the important address of the President Xi, he has asked the government to do a good job in that respect. Now, we have 15 policy bureaus. Some may be directly involved, some are more indirectly involved in youth development. But I have already aligned the objectives of the 15 policy bureau. We must go by the 4 expectations in our policy formulation. Now, as I mentioned in my manifesto, we must listen to the views of young people. And it's not just about conventional education. There's vocational education. There's retraining, lifelong learning, and having correct values and so on. So when it comes to education, work, and so on, we must work hard for the young people. And I've also proposed setting up 18 community caring teams in the districts. Ms. Nixie Lam. Thank you. Welcome, Chief Executive, to this council. Now, in the July 1st important address of President Xi, he mentioned young people. He said, if young people develop well, then Hong Kong will develop well. So young people are the key to the development of Hong Kong. Many young people are actually doing well, say, in innovation, technology, financial services, and so on. We're seeing many young talents. But then, since the Black Letter riots, there are many people who have a wrong idea about young people. They think all young people are rioters. So what can we do to proactively tell a good Hong Kong story? We must explain what young people think in Hong Kong, how they want to develop a career in line with the development of the country. We need to tell a good story about young people in Hong Kong so people around the world know more about Hong Kong people. You said you will be sending delegations overseas. What about delegations on telling the story about young people of Hong Kong? So you bring young people together to tell the story overseas. Ms. Nixie Lam, Chief Executive. Thank you, Mr. Nam, for your ideas. These are some of the ideas I have in mind too. We have many successful stories about young people. Many have made good achievements, and we have many top talents too among young people. Now, to a certain extent, we have let the destructive force have a say in our education. Some school principals have actually poisoned our students. Now we've we've suffered much because of the 2019 Black Flag riot, so we know we need to do more. First, we need to gather all these stories, successful stories about young people. As I said, we need to write up all these stories because these are stories that we could take pride in. Why is it that it seems that Hong Kong is not doing so well? That's because we are not proactively telling people about our success stories. So we need to do that. Thank you, Ms. Lam, for your suggestion. But apart from telling these true stories, we need to do more. I mentioned various platforms that we could make use of. The government will do that. I hope members of this council and different groups in the community will also join in this effort. And of course, we have to go overseas because there is this saying, seeing is believing. So they are able to see young people who are doing well, especially we have young people who've made huge achievements in science, in sports, and so on. And then we've also made huge achievements, academic achievements, such as on mathematics or, on the world history. I see in some quiz shows, some young people performs really well, and that's left an impression on me. So we need to keep doing that repeatedly. And then we will be able to tell the world our true achievements. Professor Lau Chi-Pang. Thank you, President. Chief Executive, you say you are result-driven in formulating policies. That's why the public are very happy to join you in starting a new chapter for Hong Kong. Now, there's some student of Confucius. He said that you have 5 years in your term. Hong Kong's a small city. Can you tell us, 5 years on, what sort of achievements would you take pride in the most?
I thank Professor Lau for this very thoughtful question. I think it's challenging for me to tell you in a few words, because I've got 15 bureaus and they're responsible for 15 policy areas. They are like my children. If I focus on one bureau, then others may say that I've only favored one. Now, the chief executive plays a very unique role, only to be played by himself, and that is my dual responsibility. I'm the head of the Hong Kong SAR, and at the same time, I have to be accountable to the central people government of the PRC. I also have to be accountable to the Hong Kong SAR. Constitutionally, my role, I have this additional role compared with other people. If I play this role well, that means I have done my job as a chief executive well. I've got 15 children, the 15 policy bureaus. I hope they can all unleash their full potential. They may come to this council and I may say that, while there's still room for improvement, I believe you have already achieved what you're expected to achieve. I hope that one country, two systems can even achieve greater success. Now, 5 years down the road, when I meet legislators here for the last time, and if I can say without qualms that I have scaled new height with one country, two systems, and I have fully complied with the Constitution and the Basic Law, that should be my target as a chief executive, and I will feel very comforted if I can achieve this target. Ms. Chen Yuanming, Chief Executive, I'm grateful that you come to our question and answer session only 6 days in office. Now, you should enhance housing and economic development in the Northern District, and you would also better integrate Hong Kong with Shenzhen. Now, there are several planning mismatch in the North District. For instance, near Hang Yuen Wai, we have the anti-Northwest landfill, and near Law Wu, it is planned to be a huge columbarium with 200,000 niches, and also sewage treatment plants, slaughterhouses, etc., will be relocated to Hang Yuen Wai, Man Kam To, and near Law Wu border control point. These are negative facilities, and this would be in the way of integration with Shenzhen, and it is subject to criticism by residents of Shenzhen. Your policy is to be result-oriented, and as soon as you assumed office, you also called the leaders in Shenzhen to enhance communication. Will you rectify these planning blights and relocate or replan these obnoxious facilities. Chief Executive, thank you. The Northern Metropolis is an important plan for Hong Kong. It is going to be an important growth engine for Hong Kong. It will also help Hong Kong to scale new heights because it will be a place where we have technology, jobs, environmental protection, safe homes, and places of entertainment. It will be a metropolis in Hong Kong. It is also a plan to enhance the overall quality of life in Hong Kong. I'm grateful to the CS4A and the FS for discussing with me in great earnestness how we can take forward the Northern Metropolis. I'm particularly grateful to the Financial Secretary for his views because development is very close to his heart. I want to thank the FS for his support in my administration. I'm sure we're going to launch good policies. As far as the Northern Metropolis is concerned, I'm going to discuss within my team the framework used for taking forward this initiative. I will personally see to it. As pointed by Ms. Chen, I called the leaders of Shenzhen and Guangdong province first to express my attitude because we are very close. We have strong ties, and we're grateful to the Guangdong province for supporting us in this fight against the pandemic in the provision of supplies, for instance. I really wanted to show them my gratitude. Secondly, there is ample room for cooperation. North Metropolis is closely tied to Shenzhen, and we are closely related. Any development must be well coordinated and integrated. And so I have a proactive role to play as regards in what form I will discuss with the 3D OS. I like to hammer home this message to the community. First, I attach a lot of significance to the development of the Northern Metropolis. I will do an overall planning. Secondly, I understand the importance of cooperating with relevant authorities on the mainland. We should enhance mutual trust. We should complement one another and achieve mutual benefits. We must have mutual support and respect. We should complement one another. So I will personally be involved in the development of this area as regards the overall planning of the Northern Metropolis. Of course, after I've decided with the 3DOS's the framework for developing this program, that will be well taken care of. Ms. Dr. Chow Man Kwong, thank you. Presidency made three important points in his remark. That is, we must improve governance. We must enhance the strength, momentum of development. We must uphold harmony and stability, etc. So we must have a good government think tank so that we have good policies. Members of the public need dreams. Patriots need to realize their dreams together. Many think tanks have said that something like the Central Policy Unit should be established. So in some places they have the National and Planning Commission. In Singapore, they have a Development Strategy Committee in the Prime Minister's office so that they can feel the pulse of latest development in the world and in the country. And this will help our public administration reform in the short term. In the long run, it can give us policy advice on further reforms and to address the expectations of presidency. So will the chief executive consider resetting up a body like the Central Policy Bureau? Is there any progress, or is it, as reported by the media, it will only focus on international affairs and it will not duplicate with the current departments that have done local policy research? Chief Executive. Thank you, Dr. Chow. In fact, I've already got a name for this unit. It's called the Chief Executive's Policy Unit. Because I, as the leader of Hong Kong, has to be accountable to the Central People's Government as well as to the Hong Kong SAR. So I'm not just the Chief Executive of Hong Kong. I must have a national perspective. I have to take care of the overall interests of Hong Kong. At the same time, I have to examine the international situation. So this unit will help me to make decisions. So this policy unit for me of course I have to take care of public sentiments, the needs of different sectors of Hong Kong, for instance, the aspirations of the middle class as well as the grassroots. I have to be fully aware of all these demands. If I adopt a broad brush approach, it will create unnecessary problems. So there should be a fine breakdown of different policies. It will be thoroughly discussed by my policy unit. To put it simply, we'll focus on domestic matters. We must fully understand national development, and we must also fully examine the international situation in coming up with policies. This is in line with what President Xi has asked us to be. We must have a local vision. We must have affection for the country, and we must have this macro perspective of the international community. Thank you. Mr. Lam Chun Sing, since the return to the motherland, we have more and more outsourcing arrangements and more sectors are being affected. And many people are now working in frontline jobs with lower pay, and I think this has intensified the poverty gap. And for the since 2016, we have been having a higher Gini coefficient. So do you have any plan to improve the outsourcing arrangement and improve the remuneration of outsourced workers? Will you reform the government tenders requirements? And in assessing tenders, you should take care of occupational safety and health of our workers. Don't forget them. You should also start a new chapter for them. Thank you, Mr. Lam. Your question touches on our outsourcing policy. As I mentioned in my election manifesto, we're going to review our outsourcing policy. The Labour and Welfare Bureau in particular will work on this area. My demand is all the issues mentioned by Mr. Lam should be fully considered in the review. And I think to be effective in our review, we should be focused. Of course, a full and comprehensive review should be considered, but at the same time, we must be focused and targeted. Now, to be result-oriented, we like to tackle the problem. And of course, we have seen if the size of the civil service continues to inflate, then it's not something good for the government. And I think the multiplying effect, if for the public sector to spend the money, should be higher than that for the government. Now, for our outsourcing system, I set a lot of store by our monitoring system. We have to ensure that contractors fulfill the requirements. So there must be a monitoring system. Secondly, apart from meeting the targets, we have to safeguard the interests of workers, because the hard work of workers should be rewarded and protected. Let me cite an example. Now, I receive this complaint. Actually, I'm the complainant myself. Now, there is an outsourced piece of work. A planter has to be raised because it hasn't got enough soil. But then there was no drain in the planter, so water would remain in the planter. Now, with the planter raised, the drain is only added the additional portion. That means there is no drain at the bottom of the planter. So we must strengthen the outsourcing system so that we can have better results. And we should protect the rights and interests of people working for that contract. The last question, Mr. Lam, Mr. Andrew Lam. Thank you, President. I'm pleased to hear from the Chief Executive that we're going to have 4 special action groups. One is for coordination of district affairs. But we know that for implementation of all policies require a proper district consultation framework. Now, in the past few years, district councillors, which are supposed to play this role, are not able to discharge this function anymore. And for district fight crime committees and district firefighting committees, etc., in terms of helping to implement district policies, well, their roles and functions are rather blurred. Next year, we're going to have a new round of district council elections. So my question for the Chief Executive is, for reform of district affairs and district management, do you have any timetable and plan?
Chief Executive, thank you, Mr. Lam. Well, yes, there is a clear timetable because the time is set for district council elections. So before the next district council elections, we must have come to a decision and have made a plan. Put simply, we must comply with the requirements of basic law, and we will actively start a study on that. We have been in office for 6 days, so we're going to start our study from now on. Of course, we will take stock of past experience. We will have to look at the failure of the system in the past and identify the cause for that failure, because we need to comply with the basic law and the laws of Hong Kong. We have to see how we could set up an effective district structure. Of course, we welcome your views because many of you have much experience in district work. Maybe you can tell us how we could, enhance the system so it complies with the basic law and the laws of Hong Kong. We are happy to hear your views. As I said, we want good governance. We want positive interaction between the executive and legislature. So we want to listen to your views. And wisdom in the community is something we should always cherish. So that's why I very much wish to hear your views. And then we could come up with a system that best fits the requirements of the basic law and the laws of Hong Kong. So that the Chief Executive's question and answer session ends. The Chief Executive will now, and after the Chief Executive leaves the chamber, we will immediately start the regular council meeting. The Chief Executive will not leave the chamber now. Please, members, please stand. The Chief Executive's question and answer session closes now.
The regular council meeting now commences. Address. The Honorable Martin Liao will address the Council on the Independent Commission Against Corruption. Hong Kong Special Administrative Region of the People's Republic of China Annual Report 2021 and reports of ICAC Advisory Committees. Mr. Martin Liao. President, in my capacity as the Chairman of the Advisory Committee on Corruption, I hereby brief members on the ICAC Annual Report 2021 tabled in the Council today on behalf of ICAC. The year 2021 was a year both challenging and fruitful for the ICAC. Even though faced with the threat of the novel coronavirus pandemic, corruption in Hong Kong continues to be effectively controlled. ICAC has remained steadfast and unwavering in discharging its anti-corruption mission through law enforcement, prevention, and community education. The ICAC Annual Survey 2021 showed that almost all respondents, around 98%, had not encountered corruption personally in the past 12 months. ICAC's anti-corruption efforts continues to be recognized internationally, as Hong Kong has been rated as one of the cleanest places on earth by many international assessment agencies. As regards corruption complaints, ICAC received a total of 2,264 non-election related corruption complaints, an increase of 18% compared to 2020, but still less than 2019. The increase in corruption complaints is mainly attributed to the gradual economic recovery with the easing of the pandemic, leading to more prominent complaints in the private sector. Figures in the public sector remain steady, with a clean team of public servants. The society has high expectations on the integrity of civil servants. Thus, ICAC launched the Integrity Promotion Campaign for public bodies to further strengthen the integrity management system. In terms of the private sector, complaints in the majority of sectors grew, the highest being in property management, construction, finance, and insurance. ICAC has acted swiftly to safeguard Hong Kong's clean and fair business environment through strict enforcement, early prevention, and awareness raising in anti-corruption and business ethics. ICAC supported the Property Management Services Authority in formulating and implementing the Codes of Conduct for Property Management Industry entitled Prevention of Corruption and relevant best practice guides, and launching a professional scheme to prevent corruption problems in property management. It strengthened cooperation with the financial monitoring agencies, expedited the launch of Integrity of Success Ethics and Corruption Prevention Guide for insurance companies to clamp down on illegal conduct. Furthermore, a series of enforcement operations were carried out to prevent charging referral fee in the construction industry, and integrity management systems were also rolled out to strengthen these anti-corruption efforts. ICAC stepped up efforts in cultivating integrity and law-abiding awareness in younger generations. A series of public activities were launched to raise anti-corruption awareness, and the public was encouraged to reflect integrity values in their lives through activities such as Shine with Integrity, iJunior Moral Ethics Program, and iTeen Leadership Program. To safeguard the integrity of an election, ICAC adopted a comprehensive strategy in strict enforcement meticulous prevention and public education to ensure fair elections in the 2021 general election and legislative council elections. Measures included prevention and intervention by requesting the removal of social media content that may maneuver or affect the elections, providing anti-corruption guidelines for the participating EC members and designated groups under the functional constituencies, organizing seminars for different organizations, political parties, and members standing for elections, providing training for staff working at polling stations, and kicking off a series of activities to spread the message of a clean election. ICAC deployed a large number of staff on the day of election to handle election-related inquiries and complaints, and also observed the voting and counting of votes process to ensure enough measures were in place to prevent corruption. ICAC continues to maintain close collaboration with anti-graft counterparts overseas. Under the pandemic, the online platform was used to maintain close contact and carry out exchanges with overseas counterparts. Training courses were also provided via the online platform. ICAC maintains in close liaison with the National Supervisory Commission and the Commission Against Corruption in the GBA to advance collaboration on combating and preventing corruption. A particular mention for the ICAC Commissioner for being elected as the President of IAACA under the support of the Central and SAR government. ICAC thus has taken up the secretariat work of the IAACA. This not only reflects the international recognition of Hong Kong's anti-corruption efforts, but also signifies ICAC's increasingly important role on the international anti-graft platform. With close to 50 years of experience, ICAC will definitely impel anti-graft agencies all over the world to collaborate on fighting and stopping corruption, exchanging experiences, and supporting technology to make further contributions to the world. President, honorable colleagues, in this constantly changing and complicated environment, international relations, geopolitics, new technological and digital development, and even economic order are changing at an unprecedented rate. Other than reviewing and updating anti-corruption strategies, work procedures, improving and coming up with new innovative ideas, ICAC will combat all kinds of challenges with persistence under the support of the SAR government and the public. I firmly believe ICAC will continue to spare no effort in adopting the three-pronged approach to safeguard Hong Kong's culture of probity, expand new horizons, and step up its leadership role in collaboration with its international counterparts. President, I so submit.
The Honourable Eunice Yeung will address the Council on the ICAC Complaints Committee Annual Report 2021. President, as a member of the Independent Commission Against Corruption Complaints Committee, I hereby table the ICAC Complaints Committee Annual Report 2021 on behalf of the committee. This is the 27th annual report of the committee, giving an account of our work in 2021. The committee's main responsibility is monitoring the handling of non-criminal complaints against the ICAC and its officers. The committee also carefully examines ICAC's procedures and guidelines and makes suggestions for improvement to prevent recurrence of similar problems. Upon receipt of complaints to lodge with the committee or ICAC, ICAC's internal investigation and monitoring group will conduct an initial assessment. If it considers that a full investigation is not warranted for some cases, it will state the reasons and submit an assessment report for the committee's consideration. For complaints with sufficient information for follow-up, the unit will conduct an investigation on the allegations and submit an investigation report and recommendations to the committee. The committee, in considering the assessment or investigation report, may seek further information and detail from the ICAC if needed before drawing up any conclusions. The complainants and the ICAC officers being complained against will be advised of the committee's conclusions. In 2021, the committee held 3 meetings to consider 13 investigation reports involving 25 allegations. 4 allegations and 3 complaints were found to be substantiated. The 5 ICAC officers involved were given appropriate advice by their senior officers. Moreover, the committee considered and endorsed 1 assessment report. It agreed that such cases repeated complaints previously disposed of by the committee, and therefore no formal investigation was required. The investigation reports considered last year show that there is room for improvement in the communication between ICAC officers and members of the public. The ICAC has taken note of our recommendations and strengthened training for frontline officers to enhance their professionalism and vigilance in discharging their duties. ICAC officers were specially advised to inform complainants of the investigation outcomes as soon as practicable. They should also be more prudent in their communication with members of the public to ensure the latter are provided with accurate information. Moreover, the ICAC has enhanced the procedures on transfer of cases among ICAC officers to ensure that complainants are duly informed of the change in case managers and progress of investigation. Through this annual report with an account of our work in the past year, the committee aims to enhance its transparency and accountability. As in the past, we will strive to ensure the professional and proper handling of complaints by the ICAC, and will continue to work with ICAC's management to learn good lessons from these cases and make recommendations to improve ICAC procedures. We will move ahead with the times and seek continuous improvements. Members are welcome to offer us their views through the committee secretariat. I appreciate the support of legislators and members of the public for the committee's work. Thank you, President.
The Honourable Chen Kin-po will address the Council on the Finance Committee report on the examination of estimates of expenditure 2022 to 2023. The Honourable Chen Kin-po. President, on behalf of the Finance Committee, I lay on the table the Finance Committee report on the examination of the estimates of expenditure 2022 to 2023. The Finance Committee held 21 sessions of special meetings in mid-April this year to examine the estimates of expenditure 2022 to 2023. The purpose was to ensure that the provision sought was no more than was necessary for the execution of the government policies. This year, the President of this Council made an appeal to members to ask no more than 10 questions each so that the government could focus on its anti-epidemic efforts. Before the special meetings, 89 members put forward about 865 written questions on the estimates to seek written replies. The most common subjects covered were health, trade and industry and tourism, financial affairs, education, as well as planning and lands. The administration provided replies to all questions that were in order before the special meetings. As for supplementary questions raised by members during the special meetings, the administration provided the written replies to these questions prior to the 3rd budget meeting of the Council on the 4th of May 2022. All the questions and replies have been uploaded to the Council's website. At the special meetings, members raised questions on expenditure items and expressed concerns and views on various initiatives related to livelihood issues such as controlling the epidemic and reviving the economy. The verbatim records of the special meetings are in the report. After the passage of the Appropriation Bill 2022 by the Council on the 4th of May 2022, the Finance Committee considered various funding proposals on revising the approved estimates of expenditure put forward by the Financial Secretary. President, the Finance Committee spent about 30 hours in total to complete its examination of the estimates. The proceedings went well in general. Here, I would like to express my gratitude to members for their active participation and to the various government bureaus and departments for their cooperation. I so submit.
Questions. Question 1. Ms. Lam Sowai. Thank you, President. A survey has found that amid the COVID-19 epidemic, about 10% of the respondents developed post-traumatic stress disorder symptoms, including intrusive memories and avoidance behaviors. Regarding mental health services amid the epidemic, will the government inform this council first, whether it will consider launching a territory-wide mental health survey to gain an understanding about the mental health condition of members of the public amid the epidemic with a view to formulating targeted support measures? If so, of the details and timetable, if not the reasons for that. Second, as it is learned that amid the epidemic, online or telephone counseling programs and emotional support services have become popular, whether the government will consider strengthening such services in a systematic manner so as to adapt to the new norm in the era of pandemic. If so, of the details and timetable, if not the reasons for that. And third, whether it is considered by following the practice of setting up district health centers, setting up community mental health centers in the 18 districts across the territory, so as to provide one-stop mental health support services, as well as services such as bereavement counseling, which cater for the needs in the era of epidemic. Thank you. Secretary for Health. President, the government attaches great importance to the mental health of the public under the epidemic and understands that the COVID-19 epidemic has posed considerable challenges on both the physical and mental well-being of the public. Regarding Ms. Lam Sowai's question, in consultation with Labor and Welfare Bureau, Social Welfare Department, Department of Health and Hospital Authority, I hereby reply as follows. First of all, the government established the Advisory Committee on Mental Health on December 2017 to advise the government on mental health policy. In order to better understand the state of the mental health of the public, on the advisory committee's advice, the former Food and Health Bureau, currently retitled the Health Bureau, commissioned the University of Hong Kong and the Chinese University of Hong Kong in 2019 to conduct 3 mental health prevalence surveys with a duration of 42 to 51 months. The targets of the 3 surveys are children and adolescents aged 6 to 17, adolescents and young adults aged 15 to 24, and elderly persons aged 60 and above, respectively. The surveys are still in progress and are expected to be completed in the first quarter of 2023, the third quarter of 2022, and the fourth quarter of 2022, respectively. Separately, in response to the COVID-19 epidemic, the Health Bureau allocated funding through the Health and Medical Research Fund promptly and commissioned the local universities to undertake medical research on COVID-19. Since April 2020, HMRF has approved a total of $556 million for 70 related medical research projects. Among those 70 research projects and investigator-initiated projects invited by HMRF openly every year, 7 research projects are focused on COVID-19 and mental health, covering the psychological impacts on the general public and COVID-19 patients under the epidemic. These include the prevalence of psychological distress, anxiety, depression, and stress-related diseases, as well as treatment of different types, with a view to improving the quality of life and mental health of the public under the epidemic. The duration of these research projects ranges from 1 to 5 years. The results of the above-mentioned surveys will assist the government in devising targeted mental health policies and supporting measures. Second, amid the COVID-19 epidemic, HA has maintained normal inpatient services and specialist outpatient clinic services. In the light of the different needs of patients, HA's psychiatric specialist services are provided to suitable patients through other means, such as by following up on patients' conditions via phone calls. In addition, HA's psychiatric specialist services are piloting the provision of telehealth services with an application, such as arranging psychogeriatric outreach services for suitable patients living in residential care homes for the elderly and day hospital services for suitable psychiatric patients through remote video conferencing. On the other hand, the Mental Health Direct Hotline of HA continues to operate round the clock to provide support to persons in need. Under the coordination of the Advisory Committee, DH has been implementing a mental health promotion and public education initiative named Shall We Talk. In the light of the development of the epidemic, as well as the different needs of persons, such as carer, students, persons under isolation or quarantine, ethnic minorities, etc., Shall We Talk keeps producing and updating various mental health information and disseminates them through different channels, such as its one-stop mental health information website, social media, television, radio, etc. Amid the epidemic, the Social Welfare Department's various subsidized welfare services, including the Integrated Community Centers for Mental Wellness, Integrated Family Service Centers, Daycare Centers for the Elderly, Cyber Youth Support Teams, Hotline Services, have maintained services while continuing to provide support to persons with mental health needs through means such as phone calls and video conferencing. Instances of such support include individual and group counseling, psychological treatments, and talks, etc. Third, the establishment of district health centers is to enhance public awareness of preventive healthcare and personal health management through community networks. To date, DHCs or DHC Expresses can be found in and will be extended to cover the remaining 4 districts, namely Wong Tai Sin, Yuen Long, Southern District, and Chuen Wan in the next few months. Upon the presence in all 18 districts within this year, DHCs and DHC Expresses will serve as important hardware for promoting the collaboration of primary healthcare services. With an emphasis on preventive work, DHCs provide disease prevention services at the primary healthcare level, focusing on primary, secondary, and tertiary prevention through district-based medico-social collaboration and public-private partnership, with a view to enhancing public awareness of personal health management and disease prevention. Among the 3 levels of prevention, primary prevention provides health educational programs and preventive promotion with wide coverage, which includes mental health. Also, DHCs provide basic health risk assessments with an aim to identify health risk factors at an early stage. If members of the public are found to have emotional problems, nurses and social workers of DHCs will provide them with health consultation and counseling services. In addition, DHCs also serve as district primary healthcare hubs to work with other community partners that provide primary healthcare services and coordinate referral services, including mental health support for members of the public who are in need. We understand that some members of the public would face the unfortunate passing of family members or friends during the epidemic. Coupled with the restrictions on some traditional mourning rituals due to social distancing measures, these changes may easily intensify their grief and anxiety. To support members of the public with deceased family members or friends under the epidemic, the government and NHK have implemented the following initiatives. HK's professional team and SWD's medical social worker stations in public hospitals will provide emotion counseling to families in need, and DH set up the COVID-19 grief support hotline from March to April this year to provide emotion support and counseling services by DH's clinical psychologists to the bereaved family members. Thank you, President. Ms. Lam Sawai. Thank you, President. Thank you, Dr. Low. The epidemic has been here for over 2 years, and surveys are still in progress on public's health. We have seen that there is a higher percentage of people with mental stress and depression. As I said, many people suffer from traumatic stress disorder symptoms. They may become very depressed. The COVID-19 has brought along mental stress to many people, and this should not be neglected. Although surveys on different mental health has been done and that money has been earmarked for further surveys, these are quite scattered and not a central survey of the whole society. I hope that you would actually do more to target this issue. We do have many elderly people living by themselves who were afraid to even go shop for groceries during the pandemic, and they actually did not have the opportunity to communicate with other people, and so some of them started to lose their speech. And many NGOs have been setting up hotlines to support those in need during the pandemic. However, we do not see adequate support from the government. The hotline is always busy, and even when someone picks up, they do not have the resources to really provide support. I hope that there would be systematic counseling support for the public. Although different departments under the SWD have been working on it, improvements should be made. We should not want to wait for another wave of epidemic. And that, as I said, Ms. Lam So-wai, this is not a debate. This is just a follow-up question. Please raise your question immediately. Thank you, President. DHCs are quite popular, and so this can really help early prevention. I suggest that other than the DHC, another psychological support center also be set up as well to provide counseling support to those in need as soon as possible. Dr. Low. As I said in my oral reply, DHCs provide counseling services for mental health, and this can really help provide referral services for those in need to other service providers. The SWD has set up 24 mental health centers across the districts, and they're operated by NGOs to provide services for those in need and also to provide support for caregivers as well. We're going to continue to monitor the situation under the DHC and to monitor the efficiency of the services. The pandemic continues to surge, and of course the government will attach huge importance to mental health. Dr. Stephen Wong. Thank you, President. Thank you, Secretary. I would like to follow up on DHC with referral services, including services for mental health. Does the referral service include clinical psychologists and ICCMW? Do DHC refer people to these two professional organizations? Secretary. When we identify people in need, there are nurses and social workers at the DHCs to provide counseling support. And patients can be referred to different organizations, including ICCMW, which is manned by NGOs. Ms. Doreen Kong. Thank you, President. Secretary, I have a particular question. The pandemic has been around for almost 3 years. Many elderly people living alone are afraid to go out, and so they are suffering from depression and mental stress. What are some of these concrete measures on the side of the government to identify these elderly people and to provide support for them? Secretary. Under the pandemic, SWD has set up centers for the elderly and to provide services for the elderly. These centers will actively and take the initiative to call the elderly and to see whether there is a need to provide grief counseling and then to refer them to appropriate services. SWD daycare center will also be open during the pandemic to receive such services. Mr. Duncan Chu. Thank you, President, and thank you to Lam So-wai for raising this issue. As a member of the Hospital Authority, we always discuss mental health in our meetings. The DHC and remote counseling are also important services. One of the initiatives is Shall We Talk, and this is actually a volunteering service for by the visually impaired to call up the elderly and those suffering from mental health. I think this is very significant because it can directly support those in need. Volunteers are hard to come by as well. I hope that other than putting everything under the bureaus, to consider recruiting the services of NGOs. The NGOs are very passionate about such work, but sometimes they do not have enough resources. I just want to raise this comment. Thank you. Secretary. The Shall We Talk was launched in July 2020. Other than that, we have worked with other volunteers to enhance the participation of the public in supporting mental health and raising their awareness in mental health. We're going to work with other NGOs and volunteers to collaborate on raising awareness in mental health education. Mr. Chan Pui Leung. Thank you, President. I also want to follow up on the initiative Shall We Talk. In January 2016, HA also promoted an initiative to support mental health, and now this has been replaced by Shall We Talk. The public actually does not have a very have a good understanding of these initiatives. Have you assessed the outcomes of these two initiatives? So what were the outcomes? If you didn't assess them, why did you not do so? Secretary. We did assess Shall We Talk. The HA will conduct a follow-up investigation and carry out task force talks to improve the continuation of the initiative. Mr. Yang Wing-kit. Thank you, President. Under the pandemic, many people are suffering from mental health, although many people are not aware of it themselves. Would you actually provide an assessment for everyone to take so that when they find out that there is such a problem, they will be able to reach out for help as soon as possible? Secretary. In the website of Shall We Talk, we do have such a system. As of May, there have been over 1.32 million views at this website. Mr. Sanny Lee. Thank you, President. 1.25 million people have been confirmed since the pandemic began, which means that out of every 6 to 7 people, 1 people have been confirmed with COVID. Would you actually set up a post-COVID center to support COVID patients who have recovered? Because usually we also do physical or physiotherapy when we suffer from injury. So would you also provide such a post-help support for recovered patients as well? Secretary, thank you for your suggestion. We are going to follow up on this and hope to provide more mental health support for recovered COVID-19 patients.
Question number 2, the Honorable Chi Kwok Kang. Thank you, President. Regarding the non-local courses offered by Direct Subsidy Scheme, DSS secondary schools, will the government inform this council? 1. Of the total number of secondary school students who are local students and are currently taking such courses, and the percentage of such number in the total number of secondary school students across the territory. 2. Of the number of DSS secondary schools across the territory currently offering such courses, the total number of such courses, and among them, the number of those which do not offer the subjects of Chinese language and citizen and social development, CS. And 3, whether the authorities will consider requiring all such courses to offer the subjects of Chinese language and CSD so that local students taking those courses can receive a certain degree of Chinese and civic education, and formulating the criteria for the relevant teaching contents. If so, of the details, if not, the reasons for that. The Secretary for Education. President, the DSS introduced in 1991 aims to inject more flexibility and variety into the school system in Hong Kong and give parents more choices. As DSS schools receive recurrent subsidies from the government, their governance, operation, curriculum design, etc. are subject to the requirements as set out by the government. In parallel, DSS schools enjoy greater flexibility in areas such as deployment of resources, curriculum design, and student admission. Our consolidated reply to the question raised by the Honorable Chi Kwok Kang is as follows. Currently, there are 80 DSS schools in Hong Kong, including 59 secondary schools and 21 primary schools. They are mainly operated as local schools, offering education services targeted at local students. In all DSS schools, primary 1 to secondary 4 levels offer only local curriculum, whereas a small stream of non-local curriculum at secondary 5 and secondary 6 levels is offered in parallel with the local curriculum for students in 17 DSS secondary schools as an alternative choice other than the Hong Kong Diploma of Secondary Education Examination Program to create multiple pathways for further studies. According to the statistics as at September in the 21-22 school year, there were 325,927 secondary students in Hong Kong. Among them, a total of 1,125 students took the non-local curriculum at secondary 5 and secondary 6 levels in DSS secondary schools, accounting for 0.35% of the total number of secondary students. In line with the current language education policy to enhance students' biliterate and trilingual competence, all these SS school students, regardless of nationality, are required to study Chinese language, which should be one of the foundation subjects that are compulsory throughout the 6 years of secondary curriculum. All DSS schools offering both local and non-local curricula should offer Chinese language as a core language subject for students taking the non-local curriculum. Some schools provide school-based Chinese language programs based on the needs of students. Nevertheless, the total number of lesson hours of the school-based programs should be comparable to that specified for the Chinese language subject in the local or non-local curriculum. In addition, the schools should ensure that contents of the Chinese language subject cover culture, moral, and values. As for the senior secondary subject citizen and social development, it is one of the core subjects in the HKDSE examination program. Generally speaking, DSS schools will arrange for students to study the DSE program starting from secondary 4 to enable them to explore and develop their interest in the curriculum, including CS. Topics about our Hong Kong, our country, and the contemporary world covered by CS have all along incorporated into the curriculum at different key stages at primary and secondary levels, such as general studies at the primary level, life and society. In junior secondary, the stand-alone module on Constitution, the Basic Law, and Chinese history. Under the current school curriculum, students of local schools, including those studying non-local curriculum in DSS schools, have been receiving education in a learning atmosphere conducive to the fostering of a sense of belonging towards the country, as well as positive values and attitudes, starting from primary education. All along, the EDB has been adopting a multi-pronged and coordinated approach to implement national education and national security education to nurture in students an affection for the country, strengthen their sense of national identity, and promote civic education. By adopting a diversified approach, all public sector schools and DSS schools have created a conducive atmosphere in schools to help students understand the history, culture, and conditions in China and the developments of the contemporary world through life-wide learning activities inside and outside classrooms. Schools will arrange learning activities inside and outside classrooms and take a wide range of measures, such as class teach periods, moral education, and ethics studies to promote civic education and national education according to students' needs and school context. We understand that many DSS schools offering non-local curriculum have made use of museums and cultural facilities and activities to facilitate the study of history and cultivate students' interest in artifact appreciation, organized diversified liaison and exchange activities such as establishing sister schools with mainland schools, and arranging exchange visits to provide opportunities for students to gain first-hand experience of the culture and the latest development of the country, actively encourage students to participate in EDB's activities, such as the territory-wide inter-school basic law competition and the National Constitution Day online quiz competition, as well as arrange relevant learning activities such as national flag-raising ceremony, delivery of speech under the national flag, talks, film appreciation visits on days of significant historical events. Mainland study tours constitutes a crucial part of this year's subject. We understand that many schools have already made plans for students to participate in mainland study tours, subject to the development of the epidemic situation and the resumption of quarantine-free travel with the mainland, to enable students to have in-situ experience of the culture developed in the long history of our country and to deepen their understanding of the country's situation. The learning outcomes achieved through these diversified measures, which are not confined to students taking this year's subject, in promoting the understanding of national development, cultural heritage, and a sense of national identity would be much better than learning the subject in classroom. Regardless of students taking the local or non-local curriculum, schools have endeavored to promote education on all fronts through different means, and the efforts are not limited to the study of relevant subjects. The teaching contents and requirements of the two subjects have been set in detail in the relevant curriculum guides, which are Chinese language education key learning Area Curriculum Guide Primary 1 to Secondary 6, and Citizen and Social Development Curriculum and Assessment Guide Secondary 4 to 6, announced by the Curriculum Development Council for Schools Reference and Use. Thank you, President. Mr. Chi Kwok-kang. Thank you, President. Thank you, Secretary. For DSS schools which have received sub-government subsidies, are you sure that all of them are providing civic education in accordance with the government's requirements as well as in education? And how does the government monitor that they are doing so? Secretary, for all DSS schools, they are subsidized by the government and they can charge a tuition fee to provide facilities and services above the average level. Now, on DSS schools, provision of Chinese language and civic education and national security education programs, they have to be operating in accordance with the local models. So basically, their programs are launched in accordance with our curriculum guide. As I said, apart from the small number of students taking non-local courses, all students are taking Chinese language and also civic education courses. So how do we monitor the quality? We would do it by way of inspections, visits, and liaison with schools to get a better understanding on the quality of education services provided by schools. Dr. Stephen Wong, the Secretary just said that for DSS schools, she has given us the number of students taking non-local courses. For such students, well, I mean, they are on the low side in terms of the percentage. So for integrating into the national development SIC, do you have plans to subsidize DSS schools to admit non-local students, especially students from the GBA, to take non-local courses here? Secretary, like I said, well, the DSS schools offer mainly local programs, and students take local exams, and their main targets are also local students. We welcome opportunities for us to help non-local students, especially those from the GBA, to take non-local courses here. We are exploring on that front, and we might organize non-local courses or mainland courses to help address the needs of children of mainland families in Hong Kong. We hope to promote the integration of Hong Kong into the GBA through such efforts. And in the GBA, we also provide schools which admit students from Hong Kong. Mr. Tan Fei. Secretary, good morning. I'm not worried about local students taking local courses in DSS schools, the civic education and Chinese language subjects. I'm not worried about the quality. So are you conducting focus inspections on such schools? For students in non-local programs in DSS schools, are they taking, say, Chinese language courses, civic education courses, and what is the effectiveness of such courses? Secretary. On the quality of teaching and learning, support for children's studies and students' performance, and so on. These are covered in our school inspections and external school review. And for S5 and S6, a small number of DSS schools are providing less than 1/3 of the students with non-local courses, and they have to meet with the relevant standards of the international courses they provide. And when they learn about national development and so on, we will be monitoring the quality of courses provided. Ms. Judy Chan, the Secretary mentioned that they are focusing on local students. There are also international schools apart from DSS schools. According to information in 2021, international schools are taking in 30 to 90% local students. Are we duty-bound to offer a learning environment conducive to learning about the national development? Well, for all schools, no matter what kind of programs they offer, they have to abide by the guidelines in relation to national security education. They should, national security education should be an element of their education. Now, when we discuss the national anthem and national flag legislation, we encourage all schools, including international schools, to impart knowledge on that front to their students. And they must ensure that local students are taught the same. Mr. Edward Leung, for IB courses, the content is decided by not by the local authorities. So that becomes a blind spot. But these programs are also registered in Hong Kong. So I think the education authorities have the duty to monitor these programs. Should the administration shoulder the main responsibility to set up the relevant standards on national development education, and such subjects should also be mandated as well. Secretary, like I said, and in Chinese language, Chinese history, and general studies and CS subjects and so on, apart from these, we adopt a multi-pro approach. We also have a standalone module on the basic law on the Constitution, so the schools can take reference from such information, and all schools should make sure that such elements are incorporated into their curriculum so that they can foster a sense of national identity in their students.
Question 3, the Honourable Peter Shiu. Thank you, President. Operators of quite a number of industries have relayed that due to the persistent shortage of labour in Hong Kong, they have been facing recruitment difficulties for a long time. Therefore, Hong Kong needs to import more non-local workers in the long run to address the needs of social and economic development. Regarding the problem of labour shortage, will the government inform this council? 1. Given that only 3,043 workers were imported to Hong Kong in 2021 under the Supplementary Labour Scheme, and it is learnt that such number was far below the relevant numbers of neighbouring regions such as Singapore, Macau, and Japan, whether the government has assessed the impacts of such a difference on the development of Hong Kong and the neighbouring regions. If not, of the reasons for that. 2. Whether it will review afresh the existing policies and measures for importation of labour and expand the importation of labour. If so, of the details. If not, the reasons for that. And 3. As the government has projected that in the coming 2 decades, the child dependency ratio of Hong Kong will decrease gradually, while the elderly dependency ratio will rise continuously. Whether the government has put in place new initiatives and measures to cope with the problem of continuous decline in the labour force and labour productivity caused by the continuously aging population in Hong Kong. If not, of the reasons for that. Secretary for Labour and Welfare. President, in tandem with the social and economic development of Hong Kong, the government has all along been committed to nurturing local talents and enhancing the employability and competitiveness of employees. On the premise of safeguarding the employment priority for local workers, the government allows importation of labour so as to alleviate the shortage of manpower in individual sectors or job categories. As regards the question raised by the member, my reply is as follows. 1 and 2. The government operates different schemes for employers to apply for importation of labour on account of their actual operational circumstances so as to supplement skills not readily available in the local labour market. Depending on the skill level and/or education requirements of the job vacancies concerned, employers may apply to the Immigration Department or the Innovation and Technology Commission for admission of professionals, or to the Labour Department for importation of labour at technician level or below under the Supplementary Labour Scheme. The government from time to time takes into account relevant experience of other countries and places. Having regard to the different circumstances of demography, economy and industry structure, etc. of various places, the government reviews and formulates the policy of labour importation that suits the needs of Hong Kong. Part 3. In the phase of aging population and declining birth rate, the local workforce is expected to shrink. To ensure the sustainable development of Hong Kong's economy, we need to face up to the challenges of local manpower shortage. The government will continue to promote training and retraining, providing appropriate employment services, optimize childcare services, etc., to unleash the potential local workforce. To assist people to enhance their skills for adapting to the new economy and trades, the government will increase the subsidy ceiling of the Continuing Education Fund CEF to $25,000 per person and remove the upper age limit for CEF applicants. With a view to enhancing the employability of local employees, the Employees Retraining Board also offers over 700 regular courses covering 28 industries and various generic skills. The government will continue to closely monitor the manpower supply and demand of different sectors and to put forth relevant measures for targeted sectors facing severe labor shortage, including exploring the possibility of increasing imported labor on an appropriate and regulated basis. The stakeholders will be consulted in a timely manner. Thank you. The Honourable Peter Shiu. Thank you, Madam Deputy. Many from the labour sector in this council say that government always favours the business sector but not the workers. But I don't see it that way. There are 6 oral questions. Questions 1, 2, 4, 5. The reply is over 1,000 words, but for my reply, it's just 550 characters. Maybe because you are being precise or concise with your reply, or is it because you don't have any particular views on importation of labor? Well, Secretary, when it comes to importation of labor, of course, first of all, we need to first help the local workforce first. There's no controversy about it. But then we've had the epidemic for over 2 years. If it's not because of the 5th wave of outbreak, at the end of last year, people already had difficulties recruiting staff. And then we have an aging population, and we keep talking about that. And then today, you just repeat the reply to say how you could offer childcare services to unleash, to free up mothers so they could join the workforce, but you don't make mention of importation of labor. Okay, if you want to free up the female workforce, how many of the females are now in the workforce? If you expand your childcare services, how many % of female workers could you release to the labor market? Can you answer my question? Secretary. Madam Deputy, it's true. In the light of the aging population and business demands for manpower, one of the ways is to consider ways to unleash a potential labor force into the market, and that includes women, other people. Of course, we want to allow women to join the workforce. We need to do more in terms of childcare and family support. And we are aware of that, and the government keeps enhancing such capacity. So we would like more women to join the workforce if they wish to do so. And then that could actually address the manpower demands of the business sector. Mr. Chow Siu Chung, well, Mr. Peter Shiu, you've already asked your supplementary question. Please raise your question at another forum. Sorry, the speaker is not coming through. Mr. Chow Siu Chung. Thank you, Madam Deputy. Well, in Hong Kong, there is indeed a certain degree of job mismatching. That means there are jobs without people to fill the jobs, that at the same time there are people without jobs. So on the importation of labor, in sectors where there is a genuine shortage of labor, the labor sector has never been against that. What we need to make sure is that these imported workers would not compete for jobs with local workers. Then it's fine with the labor sector. Now, a number of talent admission scheme under the Immigration Department will be put under the Labour and Welfare Bureau. And then from these schemes, you can see that in past few years, at the peak, we're talking about several tens of thousands of talents being admitted to Hong Kong through these schemes. Now, after these schemes are put under the portfolio of the Labour and Welfare Bureau, I hope the Bureau will step up its control. So for these tens of thousands of quota places, they will be for jobs that where there are no local talents. So my question for the Bureau is this. Now, after these schemes come under the Labour and Welfare Bureau, would they be subject to supervision by the Labour Advisory Board like the Supplementary Labour Scheme? Or say if there are any major plans to import talents, would you consider consulting the Labour and Welfare Advisory Board? You could only ask one question at a time, Mr. Chow. Thank you, Madam Deputy. For the Supplementary Labour Scheme and professional admission schemes now under the Immigration Department, the design and the nature of these schemes are different. For the Supplementary Labour Scheme, they are for technicians or the level below. So we will consult the Labour Advisory Board, and then the final decision is made by the Commissioner for Labour. Is a well-established system. As for similarly for admission schemes for professionals, there is a different mechanism. Again, this system has been working well too. So the government is of the view that we should allow these two sets of schemes to operate according to the reference systems. But of course, we'll see if there's room for enhancing the scheme so they could better meet the needs of the reference sectors, while at the same time we could assure priority is given to local workers. Reverend Peter Kuhn. Thank you, Madam Deputy. On the importation of labor in other countries and regions, usually the initiatives led by the government, so it's a matter for the government to decide. From the written reply, I can't see what the government position is like on this matter, because in certain job types there is definitely a shortage of manpower. So what is the position of government? Are you keen to import labor, or you have no strong views, or what? So could you tell us your position? Secretary. On labor policy, force policy or manpower policy, our policy is that we will first give priority to local workers. But of course, there are some sectors or trades where there is insufficient local manpower to meet their needs. So our policy position is this. Now, in sectors where there is obvious shortage of manpower, and shortage is serious, and then the sectors are not able to hire enough local workers, then we could consider importing workers to offer relief to these sectors. I could give you an example, the Supplementary Labour Scheme. Each year there are about 3,000 approved applications. More than half of the applicants are workers, carers at residential care homes. Of course, if there are other sectors that see serious manpower shortage, we could talk to the relevant stakeholders and see how we could import labor in an appropriate and regulated manner. Mr. Dennis Leung. Thank you, Madam Deputy. In the main reply, the administration said that it's been sparing no effort in training local talents. Now, in formal education, training is for professionals, but then in the market, here we're talking about mainly non-professionals. Many, with the epidemic, many schools have suspended classes, so or they're just half-day classes, so many women have to stay home to take care of children. They can't join the workforce. Now, the Secretary said that they have specific task forces to deal with such issues. Would you consider forming an interdepartmental working group to formulate policy on labor or manpower resources so that you could address problems when they first arise, as mentioned by the Chief Executive? Secretary, after the reorganization of the government structure, manpower policy now comes under the Labour and Welfare Bureau. I'm sure the member is well aware of this. There is a high-level committee on manpower issues under the leadership of the Chief Secretary for Administration. So through that manpower committee, we will look at the overall situation in relation to talent training. For example, as Mr. Tennis Leung suggested, we could use training or retraining to help people to join the workforce. Mr. Tony Chair. Thank you, Madam Deputy. Well, it's true that in many sectors they are short of staff. And I'm glad to hear that you'll be reviewing the policy and the procedures for importing labor. I hope there will be enhancement. Now, in the main reply, we told about the various policies such as retraining or the continuing education fund and so on. That we want to unleash the potential manpower in the population. That you've been, implementing these measures for some time. How effective are they? What is your estimate of the potential manpower resources available in the market? Secretary, on the labor participation rate is remained stable in Hong Kong over the past. There are 3 major groups which are potential manpower resources. The older persons, women, and so on. But of course, if we want them to join the workforce, we need to do more in terms of support facilities. For example, for the older persons, there is need for subsidy. So employers who are prepared to hire these people, they will get a subsidy. And so that is a form of incentive. As for women, in terms of childcare and family care, we need to help them so they could join the workforce without having to worry about their family members. Thank you. Mr. Peter Shiu. My question's not been answered. Mr. Tony Chair. Yes. Thank you, Madam Deputy. Please repeat which part of your question that's not been answered. My question was about the potential labor force. I want to ask him about his estimate of the percentage in terms of the labor force. Secretary, it's hard to give a concrete figure at this point in time about a potential labor force, but we all know there is this potential as long as we provide sufficient incentives and support facilities. But still, we will see how we could measure or get a better idea of how much potential labor force there is. And then we'll see what sort of incentives we could offer so these people would be prepared to join the labor market. Mr. Peter Shiu, before Dr. Law Chi Kwong left his post, he said that at the end of the year, he expects that by the end of the year, the employment rate will be about 4%. After that, it will be about 3%. If it's 3%, that means it's full employment. In the past decade, I'm sure many have heard about this term, full employment. But then for businesses, they really have a hard time hiring people. One reason is, of course, because wages keep going up. And if wages increase, of course, the cost will be transferred to consumers. So in the past, maybe it just cost $20 or $30 for a plate of pork chop rice, but now it's $50, $60. So if you keep trying to find ways to prevent the prevention of labor, importation of labor, then the cost will just be transferred to consumers. Now, importing labor and importing manpower, 2 separate things. Now, you say you want to unleash more people to join the labor market, say the older people or the women. And then Mr. Frankie Yik, he represents the transport sector. Many of the drivers, minibus drivers, have an average age of over 70. So even so, you won't consider importing labor to help our economic development. Really, I'm worried, Secretary. how can we, promote better economic development? Reverend Peter Kuhn asked about the question too. You've said a lot, but what exactly do you plan to do about the importation of labor? What is your position? Now, for our policy position on importation of labor, I've made it clear what our policy is in the main reply. There are a number of broad principles. First of all, we need to safeguard the employment priority for local workers. Of course, the local labor force is the key driver of economic development. Now, in certain sectors, there may be a serious shortage of manpower. So as hard as we try, we're still not able to meet the development demands of the sector. Then, under those cases, we have to import labor in an appropriate and regulated manner. And then, so we could have regard to the labor market and changes in our economic development and make suitable adjustment. But really, it depends on individual sectors. What we must insist on is that if we could hire local workers or we could apply certain technology to boost our productivity, that would be the best way forward. But if it cannot be done in such a manner, then we have to consider importing labor to meet the needs for manpower for the relevant sectors. Mr. Lam Chen-Sing. Thank you, Madam Deputy. For people coming to work in Hong Kong, they don't just come through the supplementary labor scheme. We have the general employment policy and we have admission of talent scheme. So there are tens of thousands of people coming to work in Hong Kong each year. The secretary said that for these different schemes, they have different objectives and purposes. But then there have been cases in the past. Some of the applications were rejected under the supplementary labor scheme, but then they were approved under the immigration department schemes. In future, the Labor and Welfare Bureau will manage all the schemes. So would you review the admission criteria for the different schemes to make sure that priority will be given to local workers? Secretary. The supplementary labor scheme is for the technicians or the levels below. As for the immigration department, it manages schemes for professionals. Those are very different job types, and there are clear distinctions among these schemes. For each scheme, there are specific purposes, requirements, and criteria. So the most important thing is that we go by the assigned criteria of the scheme in processing applications. So for these two schemes, they deal with totally different job types. For the supplementary labor scheme, we are talking about technicians or below. And for the other scheme, we're talking about talents, professionals. Thank you. So members, you could follow up on the manpower shortage at other forum. Question 4.
Ms. Elizabeth Kwok, thank you. The growth enterprise market known as GEM was launched in 1999 with the aim of enabling small and medium enterprises and innovative enterprises which do not meet the main board's listing requirements to be listed for raising funds. Some members of the financial sector have relayed that following the Wayne Internet bubble and the cancellation of the streamlined application procedure for transfer from GEM to the main board made by the authorities in 2018, the number of new listings and trading volume of GEM have been dwindling incessantly. In this connection, will the government inform this council? First, given that the Hong Kong Exchanges and Clearing Limited commenced a review last year on the positioning and functions of GEM, whether preliminary outcome of the review is available and of the expected date for consulting the market. Second, whether the government will take the lead in making use of the Future Fund or the Hong Kong Growth Portfolio to suitably invest in GEM, or using them as seed money to raise funds by pairing up with the funds from technology venture capital companies for investing in GEM, thereby increasing the capital inflow of GEM? If so, of the details, if not the reasons for that. And third, whether it will, by drawing reference from the practice of the Shenzhen Stock Exchange Chinext in expressly supporting the development of innovative and growth enterprises, reform GEM to attract innovative enterprises of different trades which meet the environmental, social, and governance criteria to list on GEM, or reform GEM by turning it into an innovation and technology board. If so, the details, if not the reasons for that. Secretary for Financial Services and the Treasury. President, I'd like to thank Ms. Elizabeth Kwok for her question. My consolidated reply is as follows. Hong Kong is a major global listing platform for companies from different jurisdictions. The government, the Hong Kong Exchanges and Clearing Limited, and the Securities and Futures Commission have all along been striving to strengthen the breadth and depth of the Hong Kong fundraising platform. We have continuously refined our listing regime, having regard to the latest developments, with a view to meeting the fundraising needs of issuers while safeguarding the interests of the investing public. In this regard, since its establishment in 1999, the listing rules of GEM have been revised a number of times in view of changing market conditions. In 2017, in response to market views that the requirements of GEM back then have been abused by market participants and problems such as high shareholding concentration, illiquidity, and high share price volatility were common, HKEX repositioned GEM in 2018 as a standalone board after consulting the market. The reform aimed to allow applicants who intend to list in Hong Kong but could not meet the main board listing requirements to choose GEM as a more targeted fundraising platform. In order to improve market quality, HKEX also cancelled the streamlined process for transfer to the main board under GEM, raised the minimum market capitalization requirement for GEM applicants at the time of listing, and implemented the sponsor regime. Since the reform in 2008, Hong Kong EX has been cognizant of market conditions as well as the issues conveyed by electrical members and market participants, such as the drop in number of new listings and turnover of GEM, the lack of interest by issuers and investors, etc. There were also views that further studies should be conducted on the positioning and functions of GEM as a specific board for listing of small and medium-sized enterprises and innovative companies. To this end, HKEX commenced a review on the functions and positioning of GEM last year and established a dedicated panel under the listing committee to handle the work concerned. The review will be conducted with a view to further strengthening the competitiveness of Hong Kong as a global premier listing hub and enhancing the overall quality of the Hong Kong capital market. Alongside facilitating different types of enterprises to list in Hong Kong, HKEX will take into consideration market attractiveness and liquidity and protect the interests of the investing public. The work concerned will involve many aspects, such as understanding the concerns of issuers and investors, exploring ways to enhance the liquidity of existing stocks, identifying the source of potential issuers which are suitable to raise funds through stock market but could not meet the listing requirements of the main board or the existing GEM, assessing the attractiveness and market liquidity of potential issuers, in other words, whether they could attract investors to hold and trade relevant securities continuously, considering relevant risk management measures, etc. Hong Kong EX will also proactively make reference to the experiences of similar markets in other places, including the development of fundraising platforms for SMEs and innovative enterprises in the mainland in recent years, that is the Science and Technology Innovation Board of the Shanghai Stock Exchange, Chinext of the Shenzhen Stock Exchange, and the Beijing Stock Exchange. The views conveyed by LegCo members to us on different occasions, such as reintroducing the streamlined transfer mechanism, attracting the listing of innovative companies, establishing mutual access with mainland markets, introducing additional avenues for secondary listing, enhancing the environmental, social, and governance, ESG, disclosure standards of listed companies, etc., will be carefully considered as a whole. Since the review involves various complicated issues, Hong Kong EX has yet to devise a concrete timetable on the review. Hong Kong EX will propose specific measures and further consult the market publicly upon understanding the market demands thoroughly and considering relevant risks. As regards the Hong Kong Growth Portfolio under the Future Fund mentioned in the question, its vision is to make strategic investments in projects with a Hong Kong nexus, with a view to raising Hong Kong's productivity and competitiveness in the long run while seeking reasonable risk-adjusted returns. To avoid potential, actual, or perceived conflict of interest, the government will not be involved directly in the individual investment decisions or specific investment projects. It is the general partners appointed by the investment committee who are private equity firms with professional capabilities to make investments. At the same time, to nurture enterprises that are relatively more mature and have good potential for contribution to our economy, the Financial Secretary announced in the 2022-23 budget speech to further increase the funding allocated to Hong Kong Growth Portfolio under the Future Fund by $10 billion, of which $5 billion will be used to set up the Strategic Tech Fund. The Hong Kong Science and Technology Parks Corporation and Cyberport will be invited to identify technology enterprises which are of strategic value to Hong Kong, as well as investment opportunities conducive to enriching the innovation and technology ecosystem. Relevant preparatory work is underway. In addition, to facilitate the fundraising of technology companies, the Financial Secretary announced in the 2022-23 budget that, considering that some large-scale advanced technology enterprises require substantial capital for their research and development work, but fail to meet the profit and trading record requirements, SFC and Hong Kong EX will review the main board listing rules and, having due regard to the risks involved, examine the revision of the listing requirements to meet the fundraising needs of such enterprises. Hong Kong EX is approaching different stakeholders for views, with a view to putting forward concrete recommendations as soon as practicable and consulting the market publicly. Thank you, President. Ms. Elizabeth Kwok. President, SMEs account for around 90% of all enterprises in Hong Kong. Therefore, the Hong Kong Stock Exchange must further support SMEs to ensure their functions. However, the GEM application procedure requests cash liquidity of 30 million Hong Kong dollars as a requirement. And so it's actually controversial to their original functions, and many SMEs could not meet this requirement. So recently, you have seen almost no companies applying to be registered on the GEM. So how are you going to support the SMEs by these measures? Secretary, thank you. This is a very important issue that you raised. Although we are focusing on the reforming of the GEM listing today, this is something for consideration on how to mobilize funds. Maybe I can further elaborate when I address other members' questions. GEM's reform not only affects liquidity and fund mobilization. We are hoping to support SMEs, and we are working on areas to help them. Through technology, we actually have a digital connect to help SMEs to use a digital platform so as to reduce the usage of hard assets, and so to help them mobilize more funds. And in our procurement, I have given a very long response previously that we hope that we don't really need a track record as purchase, so that other SMEs can also participate in our tender. So this is part of the growth for SMEs. But today we're focusing on the GEM reform. We've always been conducting consultation work on this end. Secretary. Oh, wait. Which question did he not answer you, Ms. Kwok? Oh, the Secretary said that SME doesn't have this one listing channel. But Ms. Kwok, this is not a debate. Well, but actually, fund mobilization is very important. The Secretary did not answer my question. You just need to point out which part he did not answer. So how are you going to help SME to become listed? Secretary. At this current moment, when we look at the positioning of GEM, it is very clear that we're providing service for SMEs. Although Ms. Kwok mentioned the 30 million requirement, there's actually no profit and income requirement. When we positioned GEM, we wanted it to become an individual platform for SMEs. We have always been focusing on the issues. So from the enterprise perspective, of course, they would want a direct fund mobilization, but then there are also different channels. Secondly, some enterprises choose to become listed on the main board. They might not want to go for a gem listing. So it really depends on the different needs of the enterprises. It doesn't mean that we are just going to leave it as it is. Therefore, there is already a task force under the listing committee, a dedicated panel to handle the work concerned. In my response, I did say that there is a certain complexity because there are two ways to improve the gem. We would need from both the supply and demand side. We need investors' involvement and also the involvement of the monitoring agencies, and we also need intermediaries. Therefore, we need more time to work on that. However, we are still going to continue to listen to members' views. Mr. Robert Lee, thank you. Based on the question raised, the HKMA in March published a report in which some proposals were made on short, mid, and long-term views, including that based on the listing rules of 18A to provide requirements for certain technological companies to also be extended to other enterprises, and then in accordance with 8 bracket A on some of the standards, and third, to set up a new framework for SMEs to better balance the protection for investors. I would like to ask the administration whether these proposals could be followed up with concrete plans and timetable. Secretary. Through the dedicated panel under the listing committee and through our meeting with members, we have heard these views. I have briefly explained that this review, we hope to consider all sides, including the listing requirements, and whether we should once again reactivate the streamlined application procedure or speed up listing procedures, and maybe even to work with mainland counterparts. So these are all part of our recent discussions. The HKMA report, to a certain degree, reflects the directions and concrete suggestions given. Once we set a timetable, we are going to update this to members. Dr. Kennedy Wong. President, this question raised by Ms. Kwok is very important. For Hong Kong to become a technological hub, it is very important to look for funding. I see from the administration's response that actually they're exploring the star market of the Shanghai Stock Exchange, Chi-Next of the Shenzhen Stock Exchange. Therefore, we see that the PE ratio is really quite high on the mainland. Since the administration has been discussing with the mainland on southbound connect, would you also continue to expand the scope so that mainland investors can also invest in smaller enterprises and not just on large-scale enterprises? The sponsor for mainboard listing in Hong Kong can also act as a market maker. GEM is mainly for newer companies, and there may not be too high of a market issuance and liquidity may not be as strong. But can the administration consider in future to allow market maker to also provide service to the GEM board as well? Secretary, let me try to address these questions. First of all, from a more general point of view, how can we better allow southbound investment? We are trying to optimize our stock connect to try to control our risk and at the same time push for such exchanges. SMEs, including some of the non-profit sci-tech companies on our main board. So these are all included in the Stock Connect. Can this also include GEM as well? Well, we must set a strong foundation before the southbound investment. We must ensure that we have a strong foundation to attract such investments. We have now northbound, we already have the innovation board, and southbound, we can work on optimizing Stock Connect so that markets on both sides can further develop. However, on the premise, we must first prepare well. Therefore, we must continue with our consultation and we will consider the market maker proposal. Dr. Tan Yueheng. Thank you, President. Well, it's actually a dilemma or a conflict for Hong Kong market. On one side, some large enterprises want to become listed, yet they're not able to meet the requirements of the main board. Yet, on the other hand, there are some issues with GEM. And this has been a problem for many years. Of course, we cannot say that we should go back to the 2017 requirements and just make change immediately. So I would like to ask the Secretary whether you would consider to try to also to introduce the main board listing requirement 18A into GEM. For example, on the team support on such of the listing requirements, can you consider actually using some of the listing requirements and to have them used in GEM? I'm sorry, you can only raise one question, but can you actually to try to provide some tax incentives for those who want to become listed in Hong Kong, and perhaps provide such a tax waiver, or perhaps to provide them with a cash rebate or cash incentive? Secretary. Thank you for your questions. Let me try to address this from two perspectives. First of all, on listing requirements, Dr. Tan is correct. The review is not only to just review the listing requirements. We want to improve the market. We also need to ensure trading in its growth. Therefore, we will need to look at the threshold and also to consider how the enterprises are after going listed. Secondly, on a profit requirement, at this moment, we do not have such a requirement at GEM. We only have a cash flow requirement. So, to a certain extent, for those without profit or no income, such as many of the new tech companies, we do have arrangements for those companies. But there are some differences here because for biomedical companies, even though they are operating without profit and without income, investors can assess the value of the company because there are many objectives such as clinical trial results. And so these indicators are actually separate from the company's profit. But investors sort of know of the performance through such indicators. Well, GEM is not limited to a certain enterprise. It's actually an open market. So how are we going to go forward? We'll listen to all views.
Question number 5, the Honorable Lai Tong-kwok. Madam Deputy, in 2005, the Hong Kong Housing Authority divested 180 non-residential properties to the Link Real Estate Investment Trust, the Link. The Link was subsequently renamed as Link Real Estate Investment Trust, Link REIT. Many members of the public have relayed that shop tenants have been constantly subject to rental increases imposed by Link REIT despite its poor management, and that a number of commercial facilities in public rental housing estates and subsidized housing estates have been divested by Link REIT since 2014. And the management conditions of these divested facilities have further worsened. For example, shops in shopping centers have been left vacant, and play equipment has not been maintained or has been abandoned for years. Some shopping centers have even been almost entirely converted into schools. Such changes have aroused grave dissatisfaction among local residents. In this connection, will the government inform this council, given that the judgment handed down by the Court of Final Appeal in 2005 on a judicial review case regarding the aforesaid sale of properties by HA pointed out that even though the housing ordinance did not expressly or impliedly require HA to retain and control the amenities in takeout estates, HA still had a responsibility to secure the provision of amenities ancillary to housing as HA thought fit for residents. Whether it has compiled statistics on the number of cases since 2014 involving amenities ancillary to PRH estates and subsidized housing estates which are owned by a third party over whom HA has no control and are lacking timely maintenance or are being abandoned with the breakdown by district council districts, and of the information on the actions taken by the authorities and the latest progress of each case. 2. Whether it knows the latest ownership status of the 180 non-residential properties sold to Link REIT. If so, set out in a table the respective properties currently still owned by Link REIT and those resold, as well as the information about the owners of the resold properties. If not, how the authorities can, in the absence of such key information, fulfill the requirement under the housing ordinance regarding the responsibility to secure the provision of amenities to housing for residents. And 3, whether it has summed up the effectiveness and deficiencies of the facilitation efforts made by the fifth term as our government in resolving the problems relating to commercial facilities in PRH estates and subsidized housing estates. Secretary for Housing. Thank you, Madam Deputy. Our consolidated reply to the question raised by the Honorable Lai Tong-kwok is as follows. The Hong Kong Housing Authority, HA, divested 180 properties in 2005 through the Link Real Estate Investment Trust, now known as Link REIT, in order to focus on its core function of providing subsidized public housing and improve its financial position. It was considered that the efficiency of the commercial facilities would also be enhanced under the operation of a private entity in accordance with commercial principles. Under Section 4(1) of the Housing Ordinance, HA is required to secure the provision of housing and such amenities ancillary thereto as the authority thinks fit for the persons involved. When handing down its judgment in 2005 on a judicial review case on HA's divested properties, the Court of Final Appeal, CFA, affirmed that the divestment plan by HA was consistent with the objectives as laid down in Section 4(1). According to CFA, it was not stipulated in the Housing Ordinance that tenants of PRH had any statutory right to the continued retention and control by HA of the facilities while the tenants were still using the facilities. HA had already secured the provision of such facilities as long as the facilities were provided for use by the tenants, even if they were provided by a third party over whom HA had no control. In reaching its conclusions, CFA noted that a market-oriented commercial approach would be adopted in operating the divested properties, whereas HA's approach at that time might not be in line with private sector practice. CFA also noted that the operation mode of the relevant facilities might change. As at June 2022, among the 180 properties divested by HA, Link REIT remains the owner of 123 properties. The names of these properties are provided at Annex 1 for your reference. For the other 56 properties that have been sold to other owners, the names of these properties and their respective owners are provided at Annex 2. As with other private property owners, divested property owners are governed by laws, land lease conditions, and deeds of mutual covenant, DMCs. The assignment deeds between HA and divested property owners also contain, on a case-by-case basis, certain restrictive covenants. Provided that the owners concerned comply with the legal requirements, land lease conditions, and the covenants with HA, the government and HA cannot and will not interfere with their day-to-day operations and commercial decisions, including disposal of properties, letting arrangements. However, if it is confirmed that the owner concerned is in breach of any laws, land lease conditions, or covenants with HA, the relevant government departments and HA will certainly pursue the matter seriously and take appropriate actions. On the management and maintenance matters of common areas and recreation facilities in housing estates, there are provisions under the DMCs, which stipulate that the owners shall discharge their responsibilities. For instance, in accordance with some DMCs, owners are obliged to make available recreation facilities situated in the commercial facilities for use by residents, as well as manage and maintain such facilities in a proper manner. As the DMC manager of some housing estates, HA may, in accordance with the DMC provisions, require the owners to comply with the relevant provisions. Now, for TPS estates, from 1st of January 2017 to 1st of May 2022, there were 32 cases involving the maintenance of recreational facilities at the divested properties in PRH estates. All the repairs of the recreational facilities have been completed and reopened for residents' use. Details of these works are set out in Annex 3. For home ownership scheme and tenants purchase scheme, incorporated owners and its property management company can refer cases to relevant divested property owners through the DMC manager for follow-up action. HJ has no certain record on the works concerned. The government encourages various stakeholders to offer their views to divested property owners, enabling them to have a better grasp of the concerns of the residents and the public when formulating their business strategies. In view of the fact that these properties are located in PRH estates and that their residents are major service targets, the government encourages divested property owners to shoulder their corporate social responsibilities by strengthening communication with various stakeholders in their day-to-day operation. The government has been meeting the management of individual divested property owners regularly to understand their development direction and to relate to them the concerns of various sectors. As one of the stakeholders, HA also maintains communication with divested property owners and refer cases to IOs, their property managed companies, or relevant government departments for follow-up actions. For example, in 2018, HA referred to the concerns of tenants on the noise nuisance arising from the loading and unloading of goods in Tai Warehouse Shopping Center to the property management company, and the incident has been properly handled. In 2018, HJ also sent a letter to the divested property owner in relation to the closure of part of the car park at Yatong Estate and referred the case to the Lands Department for follow-up. After the follow-up, the relevant part was reopened later. In fact, it is noted that divested property owners have been striving to fulfill their corporate social responsibilities through various means in recent years. An example is that a divested property owner has cooperated with non-government organizations to carry out food recycling in its fresh markets and shopping centers and assisted the production of meals and food packs for families in need. Also, in response to the COVID-19 2019 epidemic, measures such as fee waivers or rent concessions are provided to tenants. I hope that divested property owners will continue to respond to the concerns of PRH residents for improving the quality of life while enhancing the operational efficiency. Thank you, Madam Deputy. Mr. Lighton Kwok. I note the Secretary's reply is skirting around the problem here in her reply. She said that HA maintains communication with divested property owners and refer cases to them in a timely manner. This is the way she used to describe her follow-up action. She only cited individual examples, but she hasn't directly answered how they will handle the problem of long-time vacancies in shopping centers, and some of them have even been turned to schools. These affect the lives of people adversely. Now, Secretary, in the past few years, have you taken the initiative to look into whether the owners have abided by the land lease conditions and the DMC provisions? And you will not just take the approach whereby you would only act on complaints or when you identified irregularities. If the Secretary has not done so, why? And if yes, can you provide the details to the Council? Secretary. Thank you, Madam Deputy. Like I said, well, the operation of every shopping mall is governed by land lease conditions and DMCs and so on. So these have to be enforced. But daily communication also matters a lot. And I encourage the PRH residents to reflect their views to the Housing Department through various means. If they identify irregularities, say, for example, facilities supposedly to be opened have not been opened, and if commercial organizations have organized activities or events which cause nuisance to the residents, I encourage residents to communicate to the Housing Department. And I think that would more effectively tackle any problem. Now, we've heard some examples whereby some shopping centers have been turned into an educational center. Has that breached the land lease condition? But then the education institution is also a commercial business organization, and the land lease allows for that. So we have been taking a proactive approach, and I think it's more effective when we actually examine the problems one by one. I think that's a more effective approach. Mr. Tan Ka-Pu. Thank you, Madam Deputy. I thank Mr. Lighton Kwok for raising this question. In fact, in the past 2 terms of government, the 3 livelihood issues have been floated, and the link rate has been one of the major obstacles, and it seems that nothing has been done to tackle it. Now we have this housing bureau, an independent bureau to deal with housing issues. So we must deal with this hot button issue of the link rate. Now, Mr. Lighton Kwok referred to the divestment of properties by the link rate, and actually we have been the PRH residents have been deceived. And in Kwun Tong Po Tui Court, the owners' corporations and the owners have been complaining to me. I'm handling that. The recreational facilities were used are owned by the link REIT. For a long time, no maintenance work has been carried out, and it refuses to let the residents to use this space. And then the owners have to show that 70% of the maintenance and repair costs. Would you come with me together to Po Pui Court to understand the difficulties the residents face there? Thank you. Secretary, I thank Mr. Tang citing a very specific examples. In fact, I don't have information on hand on the details of this Kwun case, but after the meeting, I would definitely follow up duly with my colleague. And I welcome Mr. Tang to provide more information on the situation to us. And in fact, we attach a lot of importance to such individual cases. If we find anything not right, we will follow up immediately. And whether it's, say, the link REIT or divested property owners, they would always try to improve the design and the facilities. It's a win-win situation for all. For example, the football pitches of Kai Yim Estate, young designers have been pulled in to come up with very colorful design and better facilities. And these have been reported extensively in magazines and other channels. And that brings benefits to the shopping mall as well. So we welcome that kind of win-win solutions. And if we can make better use of recreation facilities, everyone stands to benefit. I'm more than happy to follow up duly with Mr. Tang Ka-piu after the meeting. Ms. Doreen Kwong. Thank you, Madam Deputy Secretary. Mr. Lai Tong Kok raised an issue which is very pressing. Now, you say you will communicate. I think you actually are tackling the problem in an oversimplified way. Your answer mentions that as long as the link REIT and the property owners meet with the relevant laws, the HA cannot and will not interfere with the commercial operation. So you are not able to control or govern them, even if you want to do so. Now, when you first divested the properties, the link REIT, I don't think you have thoroughly considered this, that you have not come up with a legal framework to safeguard the rights of the PRH residents to enjoy the use of the relevant recreational facilities. Secretary, well, for the assignment deeds back then, I think these were signed already. And under these assignment deeds, there are restrictive covenants governing shopping centers, retail facilities, and car parking spaces. So these covenants will be passed on even if the properties are further divested. But I also attach importance to communication on top of the legal provisions. And we communicate. We might not rely on the legal provisions in what we do. And I think in the new term government, I think we should communicate more. It will be a very effective tool. We will continue to liaise with the relevant organizations, and we will tell them that there will be better solutions maybe sometimes to achieve a win-win situation. These solutions may benefit both themselves and the residents in the housing estates. I will not repeat the individual examples, and if needed, you can approach me, myself, and HD colleagues who would definitely proactively follow up. Dr. Chong Man Kong. The link REIT and divested property owners are running shopping centers where a lot of vacant shops are seen, and they are charging very expensive rentals, and some of the shops have been left vacant for a long time. So will the administration come up with new regulations to ensure that these owners will provide facilities for PRH residents? And would you also be charging a vacancy tax on shops, space which have been vacant for a long time? Secretary. My view on shop vacancy is this. For some divested property owners, they have used the shopping centers for services related to NGOs, and they provide services to the members of the public. These are good measures, and so space can be better utilized in that way. And concessionary rentals are also offered, so we can further explore with the link REIT and divested property owners on how they can better discharge their social responsibility. Mr. Dennis Leung. Thank you, Madam Deputy. Well, it is a major mistake for the government to divest properties to the link REIT. The FTU way back objected to this. Now, Mr. Lai Tong-kwok asked about the fact that the recreational facilities are left abandoned or lack maintenance related to shopping centers where the HA has no control over. The government has not provided the relevant information requested. Now, 180 properties have been divested. For example, in Onyam Estate, above the shopping center, there is a tennis court. Now, after that divestment, the tennis court has not been open for the use by the residents. Now, there is a lift going up to the rooftop, and the property management even forbids residents to use that lift to go to the rooftop. So, Secretary, do you have information on recreational facilities which have been abandoned? And do you have information concerned so that we can better grasp the situation? Secretary, you refer to Onyam Estate and the lift therein. I really don't have the information on the situation in individual housing estate. Like the Kwun Tong case mentioned by the other member, I welcome you furnishing me with further information after the meeting. I will immediately follow up with our HD colleagues to make sure that the facilities can be put up for use by residents again. Mr. Scott Leung. I have been a district councillor for many years, and I think what happens is related to the role of the property management company. The HA is the DMC manager, but then it's not playing its role properly. Now, there has been damage to public facilities, and the divested property owner is stalling its feet in repairing the relevant facilities. So will the government take specific action to put pressure on these owners and say, ask them to give a timeline to communicate with the residents so that the inconvenience caused to the residents can be minimized? Thank you. Secretary, as to how to apportion the maintenance costs, well, there is clear stipulation in the relevant covenant. If they don't comply with the covenant, we will follow up seriously. We may issue a warning letter, and if there is a stalling or procrastination, we can take legal action. Again, if you have information on specific cases, I welcome you provide me with the information.
Last question seeking an oral reply. Mrs. Regina Ip is not present, so in accordance with the rules of procedure, I now invite Mr. Peter Shiu to ask the question on her behalf. Mr. Shiu. Currently, the Future Fund FF is placed with the Exchange Fund EF. In accordance with the Exchange Fund Ordinance, the statutory purposes for which EF is established are to use the fund for such purposes as the Financial Secretary thinks fit, affecting either directly or indirectly the exchange value of the currency of Hong Kong, to maintain Hong Kong as an international financial center and to maintain the stability and the integrity of the monetary and financial systems of Hong Kong. Unless the Financial Secretary exercises his discretion pursuant to the resolution for the establishment of the Land Fund passed by the Provisional Legislative Council under Section 29 of the Public Finance Ordinance on the 23rd of July 1997, the investment of FF is governed by the Public Finance Ordinance, and it is inappropriate to use EF for high-risk investments. Will the government inform this council whether it will, by drawing reference from the experience of the Singapore government in using government assets to set up TMHK, consider packaging the free road harbour crossings in Hong Kong after the revocation of the franchise of the Western Harbour Crossing in August next year to set up a wealth fund which is to be used under a public-private partnership approach to invest in sound investment projects with long-term value-added potential in the Guangdong, Hong Kong, Macau, Greater Bay Area and the Northern Metropolis? If so, of the specific proposals. If not, the reasons for that. Secretary for Financial Services and the Treasury. Secretary, have you put on your microphone? Staff, please turn on the microphone. Can you hear me? Yes, thank you. President, I'm very much grateful to the member for proposing to set up a wealth fund with the ultimate aim of promoting investments in sound investment projects with long-term value-added potential in Guangdong, Hong Kong, Macau, Greater Bay Area, GBA, and the Northern Metropolis. The proposal is actually in line with the government strategy of promoting Hong Kong's long-term development by making good use of the Future Fund FF and setting up the Hong Kong Growth Portfolio HKGP. In response to the question put forward, I have consulted the Transport and Logistics Bureau on tunnel-related issues. Provide a consolidated reply as follows. On the 1st of January 2016, the FF was established by the government with an initial endowment of $219.7 billion, being the balance of the Land Fund at the time held as a notional savings account. On the 1st of July 2016, the government injected one-third of the 2015 to 16 fiscal surplus, that is $4.8 billion, into the FF as its first periodic top-up. The FF is meant to secure high returns for the fiscal reserves through long-term investments. A large portion of the FF is placed with the exchange fund and linked to the returns of its investment portfolio and long-term growth portfolio. Up to 2021, the FF has achieved an average composite rate of investment return of about 9.8%. To make better use of the FF, the Financial Secretary FS announced in the 2020-21 budget that 10% of the FF, that is about $22 billion, will be deployed to set up the HKGP for making strategic investments in projects with a Hong Kong nexus, with a view to reinforcing Hong Kong's status as the financial, trading and innovation and technology center, as well as raising Hong Kong's productivity and competitiveness in the long run while seeking reasonable risk-adjusted returns. Besides to support the development of the GBA and facilitate the expansion of Hong Kong's industries in the GBA so as to enable further integration in our country's overall development, the FS announced in the 2022-23 budget that the government would increase the funding allocated to the Hong Kong GP by $10 billion, of which $5 billion will be used to set up a GBA investment fund. The fund will focus on projects in the GBA that can benefit Hong Kong, including those undertaken by Hong Kong-based companies or companies with investment in the GBA. As regards the Northern Metropolis, the FS also announced in the 2022-23 budget that the government would set aside $100 billion from the cumulative return of the FF to set up a dedicated fund in order to ensure that there would be sufficient funding for meeting the development needs under the Northern Metropolis Development Strategy and to expedite the implementation of the projects in the area. The Northern Metropolis covers a number of projects, some of which are already underway. The government will implement these projects in phases according to schedule, with due consideration given to financial viability and sustainability. With the development of the Northern Metropolis, the private development projects in the area may also generate income for the government. Under the existing government arrangement, toll revenue is credited to the General Revenue Account, GRA, and is balanced together with the balances of other funds established under the Public Finance Ordinance including Land Fund and Capital Works Reserve Fund, will automatically become part of the fiscal reserves. As far as promoting investments in the GBA is concerned, we can follow the existing arrangement of making injections into the FF from the GRA if the government finds it necessary to increase the size of the FF. As for developing the Northern Metropolis, the government will consider and explore various financing options, including the feasibility of enabling private sector organizations' participation in the financing and provision of public services under public-private partnership. In other words, apart from seeking funding approval from the Finance Committee of the Legislative Council, we will work out appropriate financing arrangements for different infrastructure projects in the Northern Metropolis by carefully taking into account various factors, including their characteristics, economic values, commercial viability, the need for the government to take part in their operations and construction costs. It is therefore possible that a mixture of different options may be adopted in terms of the financial arrangements for the projects in the Northern Metropolis. However, we share members' goal of making good use of the government's assets and investment in sound investment projects with long-term value-added potential so as to build a better Hong Kong. Thank you, President. Dr. Wendy Hong. Thank you, Madam Deputy Secretary. In 2016, the government set up the Future Fund, drawing funds from the Exchange Fund. It was because it wanted the investment approach to be different than that of the Exchange Fund. It wanted to make a long-term and strategic investment and improve our fiscal structure. But then since the establishment of the Future Fund, it still comes under the Exchange Fund, and investment is the responsibility of the Hong Kong Monetary Authority. So it's still subject to the existing regulatory approach. Future Fund accounts for less than 5% of the Exchange Fund. It won't affect monetary stability. And with increasing Sino-American tensions, it's time for the Exchange Fund to consider a more diversified investment approach. So would the government consider taking the FF out of the Exchange Fund altogether so that the Future Fund won't be subject to the same restrictions for investment under the Exchange Fund? This will help to build a better future for Hong Kong. Secretary, if I may focus on the Hong Kong growth portfolio operation under the Future Fund, I think that's is actually the concern of the member. That is how we could more effectively and better use our financial resources so that apart from gaining returns, we could also strategically consolidate Hong Kong's position as a financial center, innovation and technology centers, and so on. Well, actually, the current operation of the Hong Kong growth portfolio is such that at the top level, we have a governance committee. It's chaired by the financial secretary. So that is actually the framework. And then under the governance committee, there is an investment committee chaired by myself. And then I will identify or select general partners. So far, we have 8 general partners covering many different sectors, technology, healthcare, logistics, supply chain management, trade and industry, consumption, and so on. So we want to identify quality partners to invest in the future of Hong Kong. Now, so it's about investing in the future, which is a subject of interest to Dr. Hong, as she just mentioned. And then in future, we're going to... Now, the financial secretary has announced that there will be another $55 billion of injection into the growth portfolio. $5 billion for GBA investment and $5 billion for strategic tech fund. So again, we share the same direction as that mentioned by Dr. Hong in terms of our investment approach. Thank you. Mr. Lai Tong Kwok. You did not... Thank you, Madam Deputy. It seems the Secretary did not answer Ms. Regina Ip's question. That is, can you package the 3 tunnels then we could gain funds for investment in Northern Metropolis. Well, yes, you told us you don't have any specific plan, but you have various channels. But then Mrs. Regina Yip has proposed this particular channel for you to make the investment. So what is your position? Secretary, well, perhaps I'll answer the question on two fronts. First, if we look at the Northern Metropolis or the Land Out Tomorrow vision, we have to look at the overall planning, and then we will arrange financing accordingly. As I mentioned in the main reply, there's a good chance that we'll have some sort of a cocktail therapy, in other words, a composite plan, because we have to look at the commercial viability and the possibility of introducing private participation and so on for a project before we make estimates and plans. So it's about how we can make good use of our assets. So can we actually use private capital for a project is something we will have to consider. So there are many options, and the option you just mentioned is one that we could consider too. Now, the member, well, actually, I read that article written by the member, published in the newspaper. So I think we have to look at the whole planning process and the financing needs, and then we'll make the suitable arrangement. That's the second point. Third point, Mrs. Yip has put forward this proposal. What are the considerations? Well, we have done something similar. It's the securitization of 5 tunnels and 1 bridge. And there are several considerations behind that project. One, of course, is of the macro financial consideration. And then we also have to look at the quality of the assets for tunnels. They are not a growth investment in a way. And then investors, of course, will have to do comparison to see if there are other better options. Now, we are having an increase in interest rate, and then people will consider their return, say, if they deposit money in the bank and so on. So, in short, in response to the question, this is one of the directions we'll consider to see how we could revitalize our assets in support of our strategic investment strategy. Ms. Carmen Ken. Thank you, Madam Deputy. Mrs. Regina Yip's question points out to one thing. For the $219 billion future fund, it was set up in 2016. It came from the $800 billion plus exchange fund. The land fund. Well, the land fund was set up by a resolution, and then Financial Secretary, in accordance with Section 7 of the resolution, the Financial Secretary could exercise discretion to make investment in a way he so decides. So there is supposed to be flexibility. But now the land fund, which is supposed to have flexibility, became the exchange fund, and now we have the future fund out of the exchange fund. So again, there are restrictions on the investment strategy, such as the investment products and so on. There's less flexibility. So the Secretary still has not answered Dr. Wendy Hong's and Mr. Lai Tong Kwok's question. That is the very core of the main question of Mrs. Regina Yip. So the government has not answered the question. So would you consider taking the future fund out of the exchange fund so there could be more flexible investment? If you don't have such considerations, what are the reasons? Secretary. I think the member has asked the question, and really, if we want to take, we are actually we set up the future fund out of the exchange funds because we want to have other more flexible investment. So we're already doing that. And some members express concern that if everything is put under the exchange fund, then our investment strategy may be too conservative. And then we could not achieve any strategic benefits other than investment returns. Well, that's exactly why we have the Hong Kong Growth Portfolio. There are 3 levels. First, we have the Governance Committee chaired by the Financial Secretary, and then we have the Investment Committee to select general partners for making investment. We think this is the right direction because that's a way for us to make good use of our financial resources. And then we should consider not just Hong Kong's status as an international financial center, but also an innovation and technology center and so on. So we need to make sure we could add value to these centers. And then when we select general partners, we look at their experience in the relevant sector. For example, biotechnology, consumption, and so on, as I explained. Because we want to use private resources and revitalize our investment portfolio for the long-term benefit of Hong Kong. But would there be other major initiatives? Well, we are more than happy to listen to the views of members on that. Thank you. Mr. Holden Chow. Madam Deputy, in Mrs. Regina Ip's question, it's actually talking about changing our approach so we could invest in some suitable projects in the GBA. Now, $5 billion has been used to set up the GBA investment fund. So if we invest in that, now these days when we talk about KPI, we shouldn't just be talking about monetary returns. We have to see whether the investment will help to promote the development of GBA in a way that benefits the people of Hong Kong. So if the money is put in the GBA investment fund, apart from looking at the monetary return, are there any other indicators to measure whether the fund will help Hong Kong people to integrate better into the GBA development? Secretary. Oh, Mr. Ho Chow raises a very important question. So how do we measure the performance of the investment, and how do we monitor the investment to make sure that we could meet the intended objectives? On the first point, when we select general partners, first we will only select experts in the sector, and also we have to consider the Hong Kong nexus, but then the definition must be wide, and so these companies must have been listed in Hong Kong. Apart from that, can they bring their production lines to Hong Kong? What about their R&D functions? Could they be relocated to Hong Kong? And then we also see whether the development could help to promote the development of the industrial chain as a whole. So these are what we consider in terms of the Hong Kong nexus. Second question, so when we have set the criteria, how do we monitor the criteria are met? With the support of the Hong Kong Monetary Authority, we will do annual review. We will see if the investments achieve the intended aim. And of course, the colleagues of the Hong Kong Monetary Authority have regular communication with partners, and so you can rest assured. Ms. Carmen Ken. Thank you, Madam Deputy. The Secretary still has not answered the question. Now, for the Hong Kong growth portfolio or the long-term portfolio, however you name it, is still under the exchange fund. Is that correct? Can I ask the Secretary to confirm that's the case? If it's still subject to the exchange fund ordinance, then it's still subject to the statutory purposes of the exchange fund, because the statutory purpose of the exchange fund is just limited to purposes that may affect the exchange rate of Hong Kong. Is about maintaining Hong Kong's position as an international financial center. Is also to maintain our monetary stability. So that's why there are restrictions, and the approach is conservative. So even if you call it the Hong Kong growth portfolio or long-term growth portfolio, it's still under the exchange fund, right? Is that the case? Can you confirm that? Secretary, put simply, the growth portfolio has actually been taken out of the exchange fund. It's no longer a part of the exchange fund. So we'll go by the standards set by the governance committee, and then the investment committee will identify general partners. So your concern is not valid. Dr. Wendy Hong, please turn on Dr. Hong's microphone. Dr. Hong, please repeat your question. Thank you, Secretary, for your reply. If may ask further, would you consider taking the future fund out of the exchange fund altogether? Then there will be more flexibility for the future fund. Secretary. In the main reply, I've actually touched upon that. That's the direction in the long run. It's a way for us to revitalize our assets. So we will consider different suggestions and directions, and maybe after the meeting we could follow up on how we could, well, ensure fiscal stability, we could maximize our resources. Thank you. End of question. Government Bill, first reading, Anti-Money Laundering and Counter-Terrorist Financing Amendment Bill 2022. Second reading, Secretary for Financial Services and the Treasury.